Good afternoon. Now that was
I
working.
got you. I get your number.
Well, I want to welcome all of you to Wichita. This is the first time we've had a meeting start at 12 for a while. We hope it works. We're going to have the public hearing is going to be the first business item, which we don't have any, but in the future, the first thing we're going to go into is going to be the public hearing. Then we'll have general public comment on non-agenda items. But before that, let's introduce the commissioners and staff, starting on my far left.
Troy Sporer, Oakley, Kansas.
Bill Escarino, Garden City.
Lauren Quayle Sill, Hutchinson.
I'm Gerald Lauber from Topeka.
Warren Gefeller, Russell.
Emmerich Cross, Kansas City.
Sheila Camus, commission support.
Jason Nixon, Commissioner Support.
Dan Riley, Chief Counsel.
God love the Secretary.
Stuart Trog, Assistant Secretary.
All right, thank you. Sheila, is there any additions to the agenda?
There is a revised agenda, and I meant to give you one, but we added free park entrance and free fishing days in the secretary's resolution to the public hearing. Stuart will present that under public hearing. So first thing this afternoon, Stuart will present that.
And that
I
was
gave
the
you
handout
I
you
gave you
gave.
the resolution, but I forgot to give you the new agenda. I'm sorry.
All right. Could I have a motion that we approve the minutes from the previous meeting?
Commissioner Sill, I move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the minutes be approved as presented. Is there any additional discussion? If not, I'll entertain a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, that moved right along pretty quickly. Now, the public hearing. We don't have anything tonight. There's nothing that we have to vote on. But if we did, this would be the time to do it, and we have to publish that.
This is where we're going to present the free fishing and
Right.
park days.
So Stuart, you want to
Yes, sir.
help us with that?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Like Sheila said, we've got a couple of secretary resolutions just to go over briefly. I'm not going to go over these in detail with each and every date. This covers both the 2023 Kansas Free Park Entrance Days as well as the 2023 Free Fishing Days. And you all should have a copy of this. Plus, for the visiting public, there's copies in the back too. So for the Free Fishing Days, I believe it's June 3rd and 4th. Yeah, for this calendar year. And then a whole slew of dates throughout the months of 2023 for the Free Park Entrance Days. Really no action to take on these resolutions other than the secretary's signature on both of these. And I believe he's already done that or will do that. So that's really all there is to these two resolutions. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Any questions for Stuart? Well, he'll be available to answer questions later if anybody has anything. At this point, we have general public comment on non-agenda items. We'll also bring this up later in the meeting so that we have plenty of time for something. And yes, sir, would you come up, state your name, and so we can get it in the minutes? Yep, you, please.
Glenn Beckel, and I fish on property at Glen Elder, Kansas. And the water is not running in the lakes at Glen Elder right now. And the chumming needs to stop. I mean, them guys are guide services. They're just cleaning the lake out, and the guides do not have to pay any money to fish here. You know, it's just everything's free. And there should be a charge for that, and the chumming needs to stop. I mean, this is way overboard. I give you a picture of some of it. And this is going on about 3 to 4 times a day, you know, during the month of channel cat fishing. That's every day. And they have 8 to 10 guys on a pontoon, and they go out. There's the soybean piles about that high, all over different places in the lake. They chum every day, every night they chum. And you sit on the bank and you won't catch anything. So it's just not a good thing anymore. I mean, it's been going on for 30 years. Got 2 lakes running in, you know, 2 rivers. And then they got a post up, you know, like on one side of the river there, you can't drive down anymore. You have to walk in about 1/8 of a mile to get to it. And I don't think that's necessary.
Okay.
But, you know, and there's a lot of mess thistles out there. And then they got the pipe going into the lake to, you know, to get rid of the grind to fish and stuff. Well, it needs to go in a little bit farther. They haven't added any on. So there's just different things that need to be done at that lake, you know. But them chummers, you know, that they see they run that fish grinder all the time just for them. And that's why it's always wore out. So, you know, you need to be charging somebody to, like the guys who's doing the chumming and the guiding up there all over these lakes. They need to be paying something to the state instead of everything free.
Well, part of the problem is that from our perspective, if it's a federal impoundment, which Glen Elder would be, it's a Bureau of Land Reclamation. We have no ability to regulate activities on that. That has to come from the feds. We can encourage,
Yeah,
but there's really not much we can do. As far as the fish cleaning, it was my understanding that to some extent, KDHE has some involvement in the fish cleaning stations that try to minimize inappropriate discharge. I know the one at Lake Perry has been shut down for several years, and it was primarily because of the continued use by the cat fishermen who do have it figured out with soybeans. You know, I don't know if, you know, having no chumming across the state, if you say don't chum excessively, nobody does that. Everybody just chums moderately. And I'm not totally sure what we can do. My suggestion is going to be have some of our staff seriously look into this and see if there are certain things that we can do to sort of minimize it, because you're not the first person who's made this
yeah,
observation.
Yeah.
And we have some pictures here of some of the evidence. So while they are not breaking any laws, they're certainly not guilty of a modest harvest.
no,
Mr. Chair, if I might, Brad Lovell, Secretary, I know we've had a lot of discussions about this because I've been in on, right? So we've got our fishery chief back here. Brian, would you be interested in commenting? Because there's been a lot of discussion about this and how it affects the channel cat fishery there and everything. So if, yeah, come on up. And
Come
then-
on up.
And then I know Stuart Schrag has a perspective on it too to add at the end, so.
there's just no water, you know, going into the river anymore. Everything's dry, so they're just gonna clean it out a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. This has been brought to our attention before, and I think the last couple of years, we've asked our staff to look into, so what we do is we look at it from a population standpoint. I'm not sure about the fish cleaning station side of things, but in terms of the catfish harvest, we've looked at that over the years, and we're still looking at it. So far, our catch has been fairly steady from year to year in our gill nets. It has dropped a little bit overall, but the actual size of channel catfish has increased, whether that's due to some harvest or not. So overall, the quality fish are increasing and maybe the numbers are decreasing, but recruitment is maintaining every year. So as of right now, we have some tools in our tool belt, which would be to decrease the limit from 10 to 5 or something like that. But right now with that population relatively stable, it's something we're still looking at, but I don't think we're there yet. And then I guess the important thing to note is we try to stay away from getting rid of opportunities whenever we can. And this is a significant opportunity for some of those in the area and those that aren't familiar with fishing Glen Elder. But I just wanted to reiterate that we're looking at this from a population standpoint, and so far it seems to be fairly healthy. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Brian, I got a quick question.
Go ahead.
How much, is there a limit on how much you can jump? Poundage or?
Not to my knowledge, there's not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Stuart Shrug again. I just wanted to comment that we do have a meeting, a coordination meeting with the Bureau of Reclamation coming up. And Linda, I don't remember if that date's been set or Steve. Okay, so we do have a coordination. Yeah, we do have a coordination meeting coming up with the Bureau of Reclamation in March. And that's something that we can for sure bring up for conversation during that meeting. So I wanted to just mention that as well.
At one point in time, I had been told by some biologists many years ago that a productive reservoir, anglers can't have much effect on the total number of channel cat. That they have the ability to produce in some of those rivers that they can just withstand an incredible amount of harvest. That does not mean you're not right in your analysis, but I think we need to give this a little look and also see what the Bureau has to say about guiding on their public lands. Are there any other comments for non-agenda items?
Norman Mantle, Salina, Kansas. So what authority do you have over fish issues on these lakes if it's a federal reservoir? Do you have any enforcement powers?
Yes. We have state laws, but anyway, I go ahead and get through your questions because I may direct you to have some of these more specific questions directed to staff.
Oh, I've got a bunch.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Well, if you'd have a meeting up at Russell once in a while, so I wouldn't have to travel so far. Yeah, it's been a long time since you've been at Russell.
Okay, come on.
This issue about trail cams. I've got copies of it here, what they're using it for illegally. It's about trophies. Top record. It's about bragging rights. Why is this being allowed to be done? That's all it's about, bragging rights. Another issue I got, selling wild game meat on page 6 of your pamphlet. What do you define as wild game? When is it wild game and when is it processed game? Where do you split it?
Well, to me, that's obvious, but
Then why are we allowing them to shoot and kill wild game? It's illegal.
all right, go on to your next item.
So when do I get an answer?
I will see how many of these you have. It's my experience that you're not bashful, and so you've got lots of things to talk about.
Why don't we give wildlife the respect it deserves?
I think we do, but go
No, we
ahead.
don't. No, sir. we
All
don't.
right, all right.
It's about money, greed. We need to stop this. You need to read what's a documentary, Dam Nation, about these dams, not only in Kansas, on the West Coast, the East Coast, they're taking them out. They're a contradiction of the laws of nature. wildlife, aquatic life cannot migrate upstream. I've watched the DV of that dam they took out in Washington and Oregon. There's 4 of them in Northern California, Southern Oregon. They're going to take 1 out this year. The other 3 are coming. If you watch that DVD, Damnation, all these dams that are in the United States should not be there. They're taking them out in Maine. It isn't just a West Coast issue. These dams you got here in Kansas, every one of them is going to come out. They're appropriating the money. Lawsuits are being filed. I've watched it. They put 800 pounds of dynamite in that dam up there in Washington. This is part of it here. Tribes and feds celebrate the Klamath Dam removals. It's the December 19th issue, 2022, the Western Livestock Journal. Camping. We need to stop all this camping. Everyone should have equal opportunity to obtain these camping spots. It's public property, taxpayers' property. You're denying everyone the opportunity to obtain this camping site. Let's close these parks, Wilson Park, all the others. Let's enclose it for fence and put buffalo and elk in there.
Are you serious?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
It's being done out west.
All right. I think that at this point in time, the questions you have, well, there's somewhat of a gotcha question. There's not any way we're going to really be able to answer it. And I would encourage you to have those inquiries rather than from a commission itself, to maybe if you could direct them more to Secretary Lovelace and Stuart Schrog and see if there's a way they can't engage in more dialogue, because some of these questions, yes, there's no way I can answer them. There's no way that's going to be, well, but then what about this or what about that? There's just no way to win. And I would encourage you to talk to them about those issues.
I know it's about politics. You'll be fighting an uphill battle.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, we'll exchange numbers and follow up. I know a lot of this gentleman's comments are your perspective, but there's some questions in there and we'd be glad to visit with you about those and just share information. So we'll follow up with you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any other general public comment for non-agenda items?
Commissioner Chairman and Commissioners, my name is Barry Raugust. I'm here in Wichita. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool bow hunter. What I want to talk to this afternoon or this morning is 2 things. One, I want to support the use of the e-tags and permits. I think that's a wonderful addition to what we have as hunters to not only document our harvest, but to give that information to wildlife biologists to use. I would like to also, on the other hand, strongly discourage the use of the printable permits and tags that we use this year. We've given poachers a wonderful tool to appear to be legitimate when they harvest an animal. You can go home and print as many copies of this as you want. And every time you harvest an animal, you affix one of those copies to the animal, take it home. And if you're not stopped by a conservation officer on the way home, you're safe. You grab another one of your copies, go back out and repeat the same task. And the only chance of them ever being detected is if they're stopped more than once by a conservation officer, which is not going to happen. I've been checked by a conservation officer once in my 50 years of hunting in Kansas. The only other possibility of being caught is to brag on social media and post pictures of more than one animal, or more than you have tags for if you bought multiple tags. Every sportsman that I've talked to is willing to pay extra on for their tags to have the notchable tag. If it's about saving money, I think there's other ways that we could do that. And again, sportsmen are willing to pay extra to have a tag that could only be used one time. If it's a convenience thing for the department, us old school guys, we like to have a tag that we can put on the back of a mount or whatever, or keep with as a keepsake of the hunt rather than a paper copy. It's also real inconvenient to try to hang on to that paper copy in the field and keep it affixed to a carcass when it's raining or you're dragging it through some nasty brush somewhere. If it's about convenience, I know there's something about instant gratification, but there's also something to be said about planning ahead and not doing a drop at the hat or an ill-prepared hunt at the last minute. Prepare ahead if you want to spend time in the field and harvest effectively. Please do away with the printable tags. They're an inconvenience to, or their convenience and cost savings are at the expense of our Kansas wildlife.
I would venture to say that not one of the commission has received a call saying, I like the new system. It's just been uniformly unpopular. I get it. I understand why we had to do that. And we've got printers all over the state of Kansas trying to keep up. And you go to some place where you traditionally buy licenses and that particular printer doesn't work. Well, then they can't give you a permit. Now you're frustrated. But I'm going to encourage staff to look into something with a little more solid material that maybe we can figure out a way to do. I don't know. I know in my particular case, it was so flimsy that I tried to write my name on it. I punched holes through it. And so I think that's kind of a work in progress. Does that make sense over there?
Yeah.
Yes, that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, to your point, Brad Lovelace, we've had all those conversations and continue to have them. And so we'd be glad to mark this as an agenda item for next time and just share what we know, what other states are doing. We're just trying to come up with the best solution. And we're not at an end point, but we're trying to make progress. So the comments help us. And we'd be glad to put
I'd
that
like
on.
to have that as an agenda
Yeah.
item because I got a lot of comments.
We'll do that.
Did you have something?
Oh, I just wanted to ask what other states were doing that use the same vendor.
The time to apply before the season starts. So you don't even have a tag until well before the season.
Do you know whether most of the other states, Commissioner Sill had a question, are using some tags or are they using the printed paper?
Jason, do you know the answer to
A
that?
lot of states are moving to printed paper and there's been some talk in different states of, like, I think even Oklahoma talked about pull tab, hard card type things where you can click the tabs off of it and tag the deer that way and different things. But yeah, a lot of states are moving to e-tagging and printable tags. One instant, like on ours, like you mentioned, sir, from the non-resident standpoint, that's what we do. We send them a different, it's not the old green paper, but it is a different type of paper that we send non-residents when they apply and when they win the draw. Paper tags, for residents, we've always kind of had paper tags if you bought it online anyways, for a standpoint. So when the new system came up, that was kind of a push we had so many printer issues with the green paper printers at our agents. It was kind of a push to do that, to go to 8.5 by 11 at that point. But yeah, like Secretary Lovelace said, we are looking at it internally and seeing, what would it take to do different directions.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Chairman, Commissioners, Matt Shook, Bentley, Kansas. I'm going to go on this little bit on the tag deal. I want to keep the telecheck, the e-check, and to get rid of your problems with printed tags. You guys can mass produce a tag that can get picked up in any licensed distributor that has a sticky back. And if you're using the telecheck with a sticky, a notch tag, they have them in different states that you wrap around the animal, and all it is a carcass tag. Then if they get stopped, well, okay, you got your carcass tag. Let's go ahead and make sure you check the animal correctly. And I love the e-check. It gives our biologists and the state a lot of great information on what's being harvested, when and where. But every park manager I ran into this year, they don't like the paper tag.
Understand.
But you can mass produce, and they don't even have to be, I mean, they could be dated or they can not be dated so that you could reuse them the next year. Just a waxed sticky back tag that you can pick up at a Walmart when you purchase, and hey, you got an e-check, and then this has to get wrapped around the animal, and it'll be a lot better than just the system that we got now. But,
Okay.
I want to talk about the mule deer. Feels like, yeah. Is there going to be any push to ever, with advancements of technology, make archery and muzzleloader a draw with mule deer? And is there any chance that you can still shoot a mule deer doe? You got to use your primary tag. The last record I looked at from 2021 was 128 reported mule deer does died. I've seen a lot of that happen on a lot of social media this year, and guys were getting, they were getting roasted for shooting does. But the consensus was, I came out here to shoot a mule deer. I wasn't going to go home empty-handed. Originally, I'm from Ulysses. Got farms in Ness County. If say Phil, I know you're from Garden. I said, Phil, hey, come up to the farm. 10 years ago, I could have showed you 300 mule deer on probably over a 20-25 section area. This year, 4 does. That was it. So I don't know that, the K-State had the big study. And I think the big thing is just the stress and the pressure that we're putting on them. You're seeing, and nothing against Eastern Kansas hunters. I'm one of them now because I live here. Even though I grew up out there, there's been a mass migration of Eastern hunters, and they have, they come out, they chase mule deer for 3 or 4 days, they drive around every section, not a problem. But if they had to draw for a mule deer or buy a mule deer stamp, that's what I'm in favor for. I'm a business guy. Let's go ahead and give the mule deer some money. And the Western Kansas folks, I don't meet too many that go east to hunt whitetail. And so they're kind of, holding the bag empty. Like, man, I'd like to go out, but every weekend there's 50 or 60 guys from out of the area that are out here running our mule deer to death, and they're so spooky and taking does. And that's my big deal is I wish we could get a draw for archery and muzzleloader on the mule deer, and somehow on the big game permit, not either species, either sex for the mule deer. Let's give them their own tag, guys. They're in such a decline right now. They're not going to be here in 10 years where I could take my kids out and say, hey, let's go hunt mule deer at the farm.
Well, they are in decline, and the more they become in decline, the more demand there is. And the demand is
it's skyrocketing
statewide, and everybody wants to shoot a mule deer, and numbers are just dropping. And I don't know how much of it's harvest, how much of it is other factors, but we will consider that. And I don't know whether Levi has anything that you would add on whether or not you think the either sex tags are affecting the population.
So related to going to a draw for any mule deer tag, we've been having some internal discussions about that. Although that's fairly recent, so that's still continuing. As far as either sex tags for mule deer, that number is really low, and relative to the population for that number of does. I haven't necessarily looked to see if there's a local issue where if it's a high number of those that are from a particular area, that could be a problem there, but spread across the range, that's not been identified as an issue. And that's some of that work out of K-State with their study. They did identify some major things that are going on though too. And a big one that came out of it was grasslands. Any fawn that survived in that study was in grass that was from knee to waist high. Go out to Western Kansas today and find me fields of that around. Our deer population tracked really well with the way CRP, when it came on the scene and started increasing in Kansas, the growth rates between deer population and CRP acres increasing really match up pretty well. So dealing with that, going to a tag that's specific to mule deer presents other problems because it's Western Kansas. If you want a mule deer, like you said, you're going to be able to kill a mule deer, especially if you're not terribly particular about which mule deer you're going to kill. But if we give people a tag specifically for mule deer, they're going to go kill a mule deer. Whereas having that either species tag, oftentimes they'll find a whitetail they want to take. And then, we've taken a hunter out of the field. He's happy he's killed a deer, but he's not killed a mule deer if he's taken a whitetail. Doesn't mean that there aren't people that definitely get a tag and their goal is a mule deer. Likely we'd have to look at immensely restrictive tags for mule deer if we went specifically to mule deer, and possibly a separate season, just to be able to keep harvest down to where we are, much less even reduce it more as being considered. So
Can I mention something here? Reason why I was asking for either a stamp or a draw for the archery and the muzzleloader season is to possibly reduce some of the stress. You get a guy that says, I got an archery tag. I'm going to go chase mule deer for this weekend or that weekend. It really didn't matter because I can come back. I got lots of whitetail to hunt. And that's kind of what I'm asking for is a way to reduce the stress off the mule deer. And a lot of does, they get pushed around off prime habitat that they like. It may be public or it may be private, just because of all the there's some areas, there's a vehicle every mile, when you go out there during the red rifle season, especially, and they drive around and they cause a lot of stress on the animals in the time that they probably don't need to be stressed out the most. And that's all I'm looking for is a way to reduce the hunting pressure on them so they're not so stressed out.
yeah, and that's one thing with that a hunter does have to sacrifice for the muzzleloader or the rifle tag. If you draw a rifle tag as a resident, is you are limited to those zones. So, but
Sure.
That is the one thing with the archery tag is that you do have statewide privileges for sacrificing for that.
And most of the
artist
guys I know
equipment.
that like to rifle hunt mule deer, if they don't draw a tag, what do? They just go buy an over-the-counter muzzleloader tag. And so that's why I'm wanting the archery and the muzzleloader as a draw, or trying to get that conversation started. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
One other thing that would help, since you mentioned stress too, is again, getting more grass on the landscape, because that was another K-State finding was that deer out in Western Kansas heavily use CRP fields and that tall grass structure to be able to hide from hunters. And they're very good at using it that way. But again, we had a tough year this last year, but I'm really concerned of what's going to come up this next year. And I've talked to landowners out in Western Kansas that are the same way, with being able to have grass on the landscape, we've got to get some rain coming in to get that regrown. But that's one of the biggest things that came out of that is how do we put that back out there? How do we protect what we've got? Because that's exacerbated some of these issues you're bringing up, is not having that habitat. So that's the big thing that's got to be focused on, and we'll work on the other stuff as we can too. But getting that habitat back out there is really what was identified as the key for recovering mule deer.
Thank you, Levi.
I have a question. Levi, don't run off yet. I had a gentleman, Kaiser Family Farms out in Western Kansas that you talk about spooking the deer. And I received a call from him, and he had a trophy buck out there that he had been watching for 3 or 4 years and been watching them, and he felt it was time to do it. And I didn't realize that we go out and count those deer that are out there, run the counts and at night after the sun goes down, and they use spotlights to count the deer. Well, this farmer has complained to me that we, in our course of counting or whatever it is that they do, they spooked the deer clear out of his farm ground and had issues with all of the deer have moved out of his property that he had been watching for this many years. And he felt that we were at fault for spooking them out. And I tried to explain to him, I visited with Levi with this particular issue, and Levi, I just thought it would be a good time for you to bring up that goes on. And maybe the other commissioners already knew this, but I think that it would be good so that we know this kind of stuff is going on at night. And I just felt that maybe they should have gave him the respect to give that farmer a call that says that they're going to be on his property and they're going to be out there watching and counting and doing what they can so that he knows that that's happening and not somebody's out there poaching deer off of his property and that kind of stuff. So
Are most of those done on public roads?
They're done off of public roads. And we've tried on certain routes if we can. Crews change each year often. Certainly some of our full-time staff do the same routes every year. But the sheer number of people that we'd have to contact to be able to contact everybody long routes would be, I'd have to hire probably 2 or 3 more people just to make those phone calls for the time to do it. It's not been my experience that deer necessarily flee and stay away. I would have to be concerned that there's maybe something else going on too beyond that. Because I've gone back and spotlighted the same route multiple nights in a row, and the same deer are out there every night. Certainly some deer do run away from the lights. Oftentimes they would run away if you just stopped the vehicle too. But the other thing is, the western half of Kansas, deer home ranges are huge. But even whitetail deer, you get out to where what you saw at the study where you're talking 10, 12 square miles for a home range for whitetails, not just mule deer. And in the same places in Kansas, what we saw was that whitetail deer home ranges and mule deer home ranges were basically the same size. So there's some limited resource that they all have to spread out that much. So when you start thinking about, the average home range being 10 to 12 square miles, we had a couple that were upwards of headed for 20 square miles. Most people don't own property that allows you to keep a deer with that kind of a home range on the property. So it's entirely possible that they were just moving around, going to whatever resource they need. But it can certainly be a concern. We try to minimize our impacts. We don't want to spend any more time out with it. So, the typical setup is that we go down the road, we see deer, you collect your data and you keep moving, and you try not to shine your light back on those animals if you can help it. But we've also been investigating other techniques that, more eastern Kansas urban areas, trying thermal equipment to not have to shine a light. The problem is expense on a lot of those cases. So, we try to minimize it. Crews talk to folks plenty of times at night that come to stop and see what they're doing. But it's the one way that we can cost effectively get our population estimate every year. So, but we certainly have tried to address issues as they've arisen, and we'll continue to do so.
thank you, sir.
Was there any other public comment back there?
Yes. My name's Kyle Adams, Wichita. First of all, I just want to say thank you to all of you. I think it's kind of a thankless position that you're in, and a lot of your proposals and suggested regulations get shot down at the state level. we see that, I think, as sportsmen. So I just want to say thank you. I also want to thank the wardens and biologists that are here as well. We're spread too thin, I think, and they're doing the best they can. I could elaborate a little bit on what Matt and Barry said about the tags and the mule deer, but I know it's dinner. My question revolves around the Stop the Spread campaign. I just want to know if there's any proposal or thought being given to a complete elimination of baiting statewide for cervids. Maybe Brad can answer this. I'm not sure who would be the one to direct that to, but you know, it's just rampant. Not just the CWD, the baiting itself. So I don't know who could answer that, or if you just want to.
Yeah, Levi's the right guy, and we've that conversation has been evolving recently, and so Levi, jump in.
Yeah, we've had some more discussions about it, investigating it deeper. I think, you know, it's probably the goal. It's just how do we get there from where we are? You know, prior to, I don't even know the date, Stuart, I think you had mentioned it, but at one point we didn't bait in Kansas at all.
Yeah. Do we have a date?
And I'd have to look and see when that came around, but.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Levi, my best recollection is when, you know, we opened up to non-residents, and prior to that, we really didn't have a culture of baiting in Kansas, and that culture kind of came with that change. So,
but there's, you know, it's a really complicated topic because it's not just, you know, from a biologist, wildlife disease type standpoint, it's, you know, it's a thing we don't want to do, but you know, it's become a cottage industry, if not more so, for feeders and corn and that kind of stuff. So it's how do we address it that that we're not necessarily just shut down right away and told, nope, it's going to keep continuing from beyond our ability to work with if it comes from the legislature. But, you know, we've got to get those landowners on board too, because it's across public, it's all, you know, we've addressed it on public land, but it's on private land. And so how do we address it and build support too? Our last, even for hunters, there wasn't, you know, even 50% support to even limit it. So we've got to address that, add education. And that's a lot of what our Stop the Spread was, you know, most related to CWD, but that's part of it. And we've, after September, when we had our morning discussion panel on CWD in Kansas, we talked about working on building an educational campaign to, you know, get more information out, you know, get that information into our hunters' hands so that they understand why it's important that this is something we need to address. So,
well, I think if there's anything that we as sportsmen can do to facilitate that, I know several that would be interested. So if it is, just make an announcement so that we can jump on board. We appreciate your work, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could, to Levi's comments, we know if we talk with you all and made tried to make after this date, no more baiting in Kansas, it would be a huge mess, right? So by educating, to Levi's point, educating and then working to start down this road, right? Start with people who voluntarily will do it and give people plenty of warning. You know, that's the kind of thing we're thinking of, but we are having those conversations, and we'll be glad to share those with you and the public, and use everybody's best advice on how we can constructively move ahead. It wasn't that long ago when there wasn't really good science on the connection between baiting and CWD, and that's changed. And with that, good science will change our policies.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Jackie Augustine. I'm the Executive Director for Audubon, Kansas. Just two things I'd like to mention. First is we're real supportive of the wildlife license plates. And so I was curious if part of that's going to be part of the updates today. And secondly, we were really excited about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act and how that was emphasizing greater focus on non-game wildlife. And just kind of a comment. Now that that didn't make the last federal budget, I hope that the commission still, has a lot of focus on non-game wildlife.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Any other public comment?
So Matt Yancey, Sterling, Kansas. It's in our regulations now that you can use with the involvement of technology, you can use a drone to scout for hunting, but you can't hunt for 24 hours on that piece of property. My question to you is, why isn't recovering animals part of that with the same exclusion of not being able to hunt after 24 hours of using it?
I have no idea, Brad.
So I'm sorry. Yeah, Brad Lovelace. So you can't use them to hunt for 24 hours after you've used them, but you're saying why can't you use them to
recover? If you shoot an animal and can't locate it.
Yeah.
Use a drone to find that animal.
So I don't know the exact answer to that, but my speculation would be, and we're glad to follow up with you and get you specifics. But speculation is every time we put up a regulation in place, we have to figure out how we're going to effectively enforce it. Right. And one of the difficulties is that if that drone is any part of that hunt, that closely associated with the hunt, the worry would be that in fact, you wouldn't be using it to locate an animal that's been shot. You may be trying to blur the lines, right? And so our officers have a really difficult time being fair out in the field, and they absolutely want to be fair. And so that would be my guess, is we're worried about sportsmen or women misusing that drone and actually using it to hunt and saying, no, I think I wounded that animal. I'm just trying to locate it. So that'd be the worry. But we get your contact information. We're glad to have a conversation with our law enforcement folks and then get with you.
And just a personal thought to what you just said. I mean, even if you were blurring the line and at that point, would it not go back into scouting regardless? You shouldn't be able to hunt, period, that property for 24 hours, whether you're trying any kind of drone flight whatsoever. I mean, I don't guess I necessarily follow where you blur the line of, if I wounded it, then at that point you're scouting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're saying
there's no way to really blur it. I mean, if you fly with the intention of locating animal wounded or not wounded, to me, my personal opinion, it would fall under the same statute of it's a 24-hour ban from hunting that property once you put a drone in the air.
So I'm sorry, I probably misheard you. So you're saying you shouldn't be able to use the drone for anything after the scouting and a 24 delay, then?
Yeah, whether you're scouting or whether you're trying to recover, either way. Because if you wounded the animal at that point, you're right, you could absolutely be, you could, a warden or anybody could say, hey, at that point, you're scouting if the animal's not mortally wounded. It's still a 24-hour ban regardless.
So it's the next.
It would be tough to, when did that drone leave the air? What is a 24-hour period? I don't know if there's you'd have to, like your e-logs on your WeHog round or something. If you had to log in to register the drone and log it in each time you flew it or something, but it would still be a 24-hour period.
When this comes up again, we'll review those issues. Sometimes it seems like a fair and easy thing to pass, and then you get a group of knowledgeable people and people come up with lots of reasons it may not work. We'll give it some consideration.
Correct. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Any more?
Chairman, we do have a couple online.
Okay.
Tyler, I'm going to unmute you now.
All right, sorry about that. My question really is just about CWD and what your guys' plan is moving forward. I'm an out-of-stater that comes to your guys' state to hunt deer every year for over 20 years now. And now that I'm seeing CWD on the rise, my deer tested positive that I shot back in November. And here we are, January 12th, and I just got the call that my deer tested positive. You know, not only am I now out that $600 I spent on that deer tag, I'm out all the money I spent to process that meat. And now I don't know what to do with any of that meat. So I'm just curious if you guys have anything moving forward that's going to kind of reassure that you guys are taking the appropriate steps to manage your herds right, and this doesn't keep happening.
What we would like to see is a test that's instant. There aren't any. And there's just not a lot we can do. There's just not a lot we can do. I don't know, Brad, do you have anything to add? I just don't have anything.
Yeah, so we're exactly with you. As Chairman Lauber said, we are doing everything we can, and all our other states are that we're working with to speed up that testing, because that's a real inconvenience. A lot of us have dealt with the same thing. To your point about trying to get rid of CWD, we are changing our management, and we had a good discussion in September, as Levi mentioned, and we're figuring out next actions as a result of that to reduce the levels of CWD to where it's manageable. Right now, there's no technology to get rid of it, unfortunately, but we are working to come up with a management plan that'll keep it low enough that it won't become catastrophic, because in some parts of the country it's done that, and that's what we're trying to avoid in Kansas. But that faster test is what everybody needs, and we're working on that, and we'll all benefit. But all the states, including the federal government, are pushing for that right now. So we're working as hard as we can on that.
We don't encourage or discourage consumption of meat that is ultimately being tested with CWD. Bear in mind, there is no known case where it's jumped from deer to humans. Yeah, and it could be possible. It just has never happened anywhere yet that we know of. And I just think that there's just not any real way to solve that problem or to quantify what we do if it happens. I think it's just kind of a risk.
So
it's like you shot a deer and it was very feverish or had a lot of internal organs damaged.
Right. And I know, I actually, when I was out there archery deer hunting this year, I actually spent a little bit of time with Officer Kirk Andrews dealing with a poaching case. And he kind of was just filling me in on, you know, CWD and what had going on. And he was explaining to me that there was a monkey that did actually contract it from consuming CWD meat in the past 6-8 months. And so his suggestion was, you know, obviously don't eat it because there's concerns that it may be mutating towards more like a mad cow disease. So having that, you know, suggestion from one of your guys' officers that I should not eat that meat because of this concern, even though it hasn't happened to humans yet, it's a little discouraging when I've spent, you know, close to $1,000 to come to your state and hunt and be told, well, sorry, it's been 2 months. I know you paid for processing your meat, but better luck next year. And I guess my question is the 2-month delay because of how many tests you guys are submitting based on how many tags you're giving out in your state, or what is the delay in the 2 months?
Well, it had not have anything to do with the tag. You get a test and you send it in, and the labs are a 2-week turnaround.
So it's taken 6 weeks from my test to get there since I had 2 weeks. Yeah, I'm just asking. That's all.
I'm unfamiliar with that.
And are you, so I'm from Colorado. Here we have a reimbursement program because of the delay. So obviously, you know, nobody's going to keep deer in their freezer whole on bone for 2 months waiting to see if their deer test positive. It's just going to be a waste of meat at that point too. So what like Colorado does is they have a reimbursement program where they give you X amount of money if your deer does test positive, since they are suggesting you throw it away. Is that something Kansas may move towards to help take care of the hunter in this situation that's on control?
I'm going to let Levi answer that question.
So some of the delays had to do with lab staffing for sure. Even the best times we've had, and even other states I've talked to that have their own labs, the best turnaround they've had is about 2 weeks. And that's with a week of shipping and then a week in the lab to get it turned around. And that's, that's the ideal conditions and the amount of time, because it does take some time for the test to be all set up and done. I think the bare minimum I've heard from a lab technician getting their hands on the sample to having the sample results ready is 72 hours, just because there's certain processes that take time. Now we've got lots more issues that have developed over time with lab staffing, having enough people, enough for the number of samples that are coming in places. We've switched labs with one of our research projects from doing it in Missouri to the Colorado State Lab, largely in part because of turnaround times that the Missouri lab was taking a month. There's other new tests that are coming around that may be faster. We'll see. They're not ready to go into production yet. They're still kind of either in the trial phase or the late stage of figuring out how to mass produce them and testing against what we currently do. It's been changing quite a bit. There's been, the last couple of years have really seen some major developments in CWD research from this standpoint. So we'll kind of have to see where we're going. I know it's disheartening, but at this point, I'm not sure there's a lot that can be done. Plenty of other states have dealt with it that way. I know different states have addressed it different ways. Basically, every state kind of has to look at what the best solution that they can, put into place for the conditions that they have.
Okay, thank you.
Lead by Commissioner Gefeller. To be clear, the labs that are available here in Kansas are not Wildlife and Parks managed labs, are they? They're
No,
party labs.
they're the Kansas State Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. Right. That's where, outside of a current research project, that's where most of our samples go for our regular surveillance and monitoring. We also, hunters are welcome to submit samples directly to. They would be responsible to pay for that themselves. I don't know. I think prices are it's going into a new year, so I'm assuming that their prices are going to be changing again at the lab. I don't know for sure though, but yeah, we have no lab that is KDWP controlled that does this. Most of that's several $1 million to set up.
Then the other question, that the samples have to be cultured before their tests are final?
The process that for the immunohistochemistry test, which is kind of the gold standard right now, they have to get the lymph nodes in. They have to, has to get sliced super thin and dyed, and then that dye has to set. And then a technician that knows what they're looking at has to look at that and read, because what they're looking for is basically clusters of the prions. And so they have to be able to read that. They usually have to do more than one per sample just to ensure that it's not an anomaly that they're seeing. But it takes time for that dye to set. It takes time to get it set up to slice it really thin. Most labs to be cost effective have to do these in large batches too. So I don't know for sure, but in talking with other researchers in other places, sometimes even if they have only one or two samples to look at, they may be delayed because of the hoping to get some more in to work with, because a lot of that, some of the media that they deal with, you may pay the same amount whether you do one sample or 50 with it. And so to keep it cost effective and for us to be able to pay for it the same way.
Until there's a reliable field test with instant result, there's really not much we can do to speed the process, right?
Yeah, there's been a couple of tests recently that I've seen actually within the last couple of weeks, some presentations from kind of preliminary research results that are super exciting for this. But, again, it's still that early testing phase. But once that comes around, then that I think will help aid development on a potential field test. I mean, that's what everybody's looking for. We just haven't figured out how to do it yet.
Thanks.
Okay. Jason, is there another hand up?
Yeah, we got Caitlin here. I'll unmute you.
Hi. So my name is Caitlin Lospinoso. I just moved to Kansas a few months ago from North Carolina, Manhattan area. And I have been slowly kind of getting into hunting and trapping out here, getting a lay of the land. And I was out on Tuttle Creek Wildlife Area this past Saturday off of McIntyre Creek Road. And I was intending to set a trap line, walked out there a little ways across a field, and I found where a hunter had been out seemingly that morning. And there were probably about 100 crow carcasses left all over around the field. He was using a down tree as a blind. He had a bucket for a seat in there, surrounded by all of his shot shells, empty shells he had left. And then he had just piles and piles of carcasses just left on this piece of public land. Some of the piles were rotting away already, and some of them were so fresh they were still kind of warm and dripping blood. So this is probably like something he does weekly out there. And I wasn't sure about the rules, the regulations as far as wanton waste and everything in Kansas. So I went ahead and contacted my local warden, which is Ben Jedlicka. And he came over and talked to me. Oh, well, actually, after I found all the carcasses, I was kind of walking around. I took the guy's seat that he was using, the bucket, and I started trying to clean up a little bit. And while I was walking around, I ended up finding 2 crows that were still alive and just kind of crippled. And they were hopping around, and they were only 15, 20 yards from his blind. So, it wasn't something that if anyone made an effort to try to make sure all their game was down and not crippled, it would have been easy enough to find them. But there was one with a broken wing, one with a broken leg. So I ended up taking them home, and one died before I could get it to a wildlife rehab. The other is at a rehab currently. It's at Operation Wildlife with, it was the one with a broken wing that survived long enough to get it there. But Ben Jedlicka came to my house yesterday or day before yesterday, and he talked to me. And he actually asked me to come speak at this hearing because apparently he gets a lot of calls where people come across these crows left behind. And as far as he understands, what I understood from what he said, crows are considered a webless migratory bird. They have, season dates, but no bag limit. So it's kind of like they're treated like game, but then with regards to carcass disposal and wanton waste, there's really no regulation on them there. So like they can be disposed in any manner. The wanton waste laws don't apply to them as far as making sure that you put down any crippled or wounded game and clean up the carcasses and dispose of them like in a respectful manner. And then in addition, as far as we could understand, there is no non-toxic shot requirement for crows, even on public land where there are no restrictions as far as shot. And Tuttle Creek is one of those wildlife areas where there's no non-toxic shot requirement. So you're talking about a animal that has no bag limit, and also no non-toxic shot requirement, and also no carcass disposal laws. That was a field full of 100 crow carcasses filled with lead shot that are just sitting there. Some of them were in the nearby creek. So that lead shot was, in the creek. The carcasses are rotting in the creek. They're all left out where raptors can pick on the carcasses, raccoons, possums, whatever else is going to eat that. And then lastly, and my main concern was with regards to this being left on public land. Public land, it can have its own restrictions. If statewide, the crow regulations are going to be such that hunters can leave crow carcasses out and not clean them up and not use non-toxic shot and do whatever. That can be a statewide regulation, sure. But with regards to public land where there are people out there who are not hunters, not trappers, just going out there to enjoy nature, and they come across something like that, most people don't mind hunting and trapping as long as it's done according to regulation and done respectfully. But that would be what I came across would be enough, I think, to turn anyone against hunters. I know it was enough to make me frustrated at whoever did that, and also at the fact that the regulations allowed that to happen. And Ben Jedlicka said the only thing in that case that he could really go after with this guy was littering for the shot shells only and not for the carcasses. So really just want to understand if there's anything that me or Ben were like missing with the regulations, like if that is actually a kind of behavior that's completely legal to do. And if so, if that's something that can be changed. If we can get some more regulation as far as disposal and non-toxic shot and all of that on at least on public land, if not statewide.
Okay, thank you. And we will give that some consideration. Rich Schultes will, he's our webless waterfowl manager, and he's now been assigned to look into this type of thing. And he's smiling approvingly. And thank you for bringing it to our attention. It's news to me.
And Mr. Chairman, Stuart Shaw, again, if I might add a comment too, between Public Lands Division and Law Enforcement Division, although we haven't had one in a while due to the pandemic, it initially started the halt to our coordination meetings. We plan to start those back up, and that is obviously a topic that would be a good discussion for our next coordination meeting between, like I said, the Public Lands Division and Law Enforcement Division. So we will undertake that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any more public comment?
That is all I have.
All right, let's move on, starting with the Secretary's remarks. Brad?
Thank you, Chairman Lauber and members of the commission. I'll update you on the agency fiscal status. Our 2023 budget year started July 1st for that fiscal year. Our budgets are just under $99 million for all our divisions in our work. And this report references updates to our revenue information through the end of December. For Park Fee Fund, the revenue in the Park Fee Fund is derived from entrance and camping fees and annual vehicle passes at the Kansas State Parks. The total year-to-date revenue in the Park Fee Fund for fiscal year 2023 is $4.3 million. This is approximately $2.7 million less revenue than the same period at the previous fiscal year. And you're going to hear this repeated over and over again. Obviously, we've come through COVID, and that was an unusual time for us. And so what we're doing with the Park Fee Fund, as well as our other funds, is we're tracking them based on how they compare to the last couple of years, but also we're going back and looking at the pre-COVID levels, which is more our norm. We want to increase as we can all the time, but want to be realistic in our comparisons. And so we will be analyzing this and having our internal discussions as far as how we're doing and if we need to make any changes based on those longer term data, especially. For cabin, our net park revenue, that's from parks and public lands combined, is from the rental cabins located state park system and select public lands locations. Cabin net revenue through December was just under $500,000. This is down about 40% from the previous year, and about 245,000 less than the previous 3 years average revenue. And again, we'll do the longer term comparisons. Wildlife Fee Fund comes from the sale of hunting and fishing licenses, big game permits, tags, and et cetera, to hunters and anglers. Wildlife Fee Fund revenue for the fiscal year to date is just over $7 million, 7.1 at the end of December. This is about a third decline from the previous year's revenue as of that date. This includes a $2.7 million deficit in the month of July due to a delay in reimbursement to unsuccessful big game applicants. So ordinarily that reimbursement would have occurred earlier, but because we changed our licensing system, that was delayed. So it fell at a different time when we compare it with previous years. So it's a little bit of apples and oranges there, but certainly in terms of the long-term perspective, we'll develop an accurate perspective there. Cash balance in the Wildlife Fee Fund as of the end of 2022 was $22.5 million. And that's about $11 million down since the beginning of the fiscal year. So that's a fund that is always being added to and subtracted from. It's a bank account basically. But the fact that we're about $10 million down isn't alarming. The question is, what's the timing of the reimbursements and that kind of rhythm? A boat fee fund is revenue derived from boat registrations. This is what we use to provide boating safety, education, and access infrastructure to support the boating public. Fiscal year 2023 receipts through the end of the year are $480,000. That's a decline from the previous year by about 26%. And again, COVID boat activities were much higher than usual. Lastly, the governor's budget recommendations are released. Actually, were released this morning, and I was traveling here, so I didn't notice them. But we'll be taking those. We made proposals to the governor, and based on the reply, we'll be reviewing those with staff starting tomorrow, looking at how we're doing for the future. We had both requests for higher spending authority, as well as actual funds, either from state general fund or EDIF, the funds from lottery revenues for running our department. So we'll be glad to update you on those in the future. Right now, they're just out, and we'll be analyzing those in the next couple of days. So with that, that concludes my remarks. I'm open for questions, Mr. Chair.
Anybody have any questions for Brad? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Dan, you want to talk about the legislative update?
You bet, Mr. Chair. And commissioners, the legislature just got rolling this week, so we don't have a lot of information to update you on, but there is one bill that has been introduced that is of interest, and it has a potential direct impact on us. That's House Bill number 2006, which I got you each a copy of this morning. And that bill, if you look at line 29, has language that states it would be unlawful for a person to do a number of things related to spotlights, headlights, or other artificial light sources. And also on page 2 at line number 6, language that states that any rule or regulation promulgated to the contrary is void. As introduced, this bill would have a direct impact on one of our existing regulations. Specifically, that would be 115.5-1. And the section that would be impacted is section D. It's the last section of that regulation, which was adopted by you in August of 2020, which provides that from January 1 through March 31. There's a special hunting season for coyotes that allows artificial light sources. So the language of the introduced bill appears to be directly aimed at that particular that particular regulation and language. So,
Well, now, is it a and Warren and I were talking about this, and I've talked to you before. Is this a desire to take away our ability to have those rules, or to take away our ability to have any rules?
I don't, it's hard to infer intent from the language. I honestly don't know what the one thing that I would say that it appears to be fairly clear that the language in the bill definitely had an intended impact on that particular provision in that regulation. What intent to do so, I really couldn't say.
Commissioner Spore, who's this Carmichael? Why would he present this?
Well, he's a legislator that is familiar to us, and honestly, historically, has been someone who's been friendly to our issues.
Where is he from?
From Wichita, yeah.
Yeah, 92nd district.
Yeah, and like I say, it's difficult to infer intent from a piece of legislation. You know, obviously, we can kind of connect the dots and see what the impact would be on our regulation with the language that's in there. But I wouldn't want to try to infer what someone's purpose was just in terms of the bill itself. But it would definitely impact 115.5-1 as it relates to that, the authority to use those devices for the coyote hunting.
Commissioner Capella, the way I read this, that artificial light scopes, thermal imaging, night hunting is still okay as long as it's not done from a vehicle and as long as it's not done on public lands. Is that, am I reading that right?
What are you on this? Are you on this?
I'm on D1 and 2 and 3.
You're on the other page that.
Yeah, I'm on the agency 115 page.
Yeah. What does this document, does this document have anything to do with the House bill, or is this a separate issue?
I'm not sure which document you're talking about.
Well, I'm looking at 115-5.
Okay, this is our regulation. The smaller print, that's our current regulation.
Okay. And this is
that I printed
change.
because I think that the language in the bill definitely would have an impact because it deals with some of the same things. In terms of the direct impact and the intended application of the statutory language, I don't know that it only applies to the use of those devices from a vehicle. I mean, I didn't read it that way, but I haven't dissected it line by line either. So at this point, we haven't really dug into it very much because it was just introduced on Wednesday, I believe, Tuesday or Wednesday. So, but it's definitely on our radar at this point.
At first glance, you would think that it means they want to protect coyotes, but that doesn't make any sense.
Not much, no. And that's why I would be really hesitant to infer any intent. Because like I say, historically, Representative Carmichael's been someone that's always been an ally of ours when we needed support. And he's on the Rules and Regs Committee, so I deal with him frequently in there. And he's always been someone that's been good for us to work with. So not sure of the intent, but since it does impact us, I wanted to make you aware of it. And let you know that we will be keeping an eye on that. And that's all I have in terms of legislative update, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Lauren.
Could you address the license plate issue that Ms. Augustine brought up, since I brought it up to you as well, and just update the public on where we are with those?
Absolutely. As everyone's probably aware, we did get the legislation approved to authorize 4 license plates. And the second phase of that process is submitting them to the Department of Revenue, because what we found as we got further into it was that the next step in the process is to have the plate design itself reviewed for clarity. And as it was explained to us, and it makes a great deal of sense, that license plate's purpose is to identify the vehicle. So clarity is a major issue. And the Department of Revenue has a multi-layer process in terms of establishing that, and part of that includes review by the Highway Patrol. And what we found when our 4 plates were reviewed, the first comment we got from the reviewers was that they were beautiful, graphically designed. But unfortunately, some of our designs diminished the clarity, and we didn't pass the clarity test in terms of the detail on the plates. So what we're going to be required to do before we can move into the next phase of the plate is to redesign to some extent so the clarity is improved. So we're hung up at that point right now until we have new designs that meet the standards for visibility and clarity on a license plate. You bet.
Any other questions for Dan? Keep us informed.
We will. Thank you.
All right. Now the commissioner permit update. Drawing. Stuart, you want to handle this?
I'll try. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Before that, though, I'd like to real quickly, if I may, follow up on the deer carcass tag issue that, and these 2 gentlemen here specifically, everything you guys brought up has been part of our conversations and all the calls and input we've been getting. What it boils down to is validating that legal harvest. And even with the green Tyvek tags and the printable at-home paper tags, there's always been a means of not doing things legally. You could have fixed that green Tyvek to the animal, not fill out the information, get it home, cut the tag off, reuse it, and our officers dealt with that. So we need to address validating that legal harvest in a manner that's beneficial, not only for the hunter, but also the officer in the field that's checking that. And, going along with e-tagging and transporting that animal home legally, what means does that look like? Some states, I will tell you, require just as simple as a wrap of duct tape around that animal with the e-tag confirmation number written on the duct tape. So that's a way you can validate that it definitely was a legal harvest, whether it be from the game warden. It gives the hunter the peace of mind that I am transporting a legal animal, and the processor that animal might be delivered to as well. So just wanted to reassure you that, as Chairman Lauber suggested, we will make this an agenda item, and that will be a huge part of the conversation. So wanted to follow up on that. All right, Commissioner tag drawing time. Just a quick brief history of the program. We do this once a year, and up to 7 of these big game permits are drawn and issued each year to raise money for conservation. That includes 1 elk permit, 1 antelope permit, or up to 7 any deer permits that are available during this lottery draw. The first permits were actually issued in January 2006 when 7 conservation organizations applied and drew 1 elk and 6 deer permits. And nowadays we're averaging around 200 applications from these conservation organizations. Since that first permit in 2006, we've raised almost $1.5 million for conservation efforts. So this is a huge and beneficial program. Last year in 22, 7 deer permits were issued to several different conservation organizations, which included Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Safari Club International, and Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. And those permits last year sold for a record average of $43,500, with the top one being sold for $55,000. And that $55,000 was actually our record price ever for a deer permit. Again, this money is raised for conservation programs like Bring Back the Bottoms, the Pheasant Initiative, youth programs, things like that. So this is really a huge benefit for conservation in Kansas. So with that, I think it's time to draw some permits.
Read it out.
Yeah.
32.
Okay. Number 32 is Ducks Unlimited Derby. Their choice is a deer.
That two.
Yeah.
Two.
Two. Number 2 is Ducks Unlimited Salina chapter. Their choice is a deer.
$137.
137 is Ducks Unlimited Smoky Hill chapter. Their choice is a deer.
It's up beside that.
162. 162 is Rocky Mountain Elk, Salina chapter, Tri Rivers and Salina. Their choice is a deer.
$143.
143 is Ducks Unlimited, NCK Shooter sponsor, number 90. Their choice is a deer.
$183.
183 Ducks Unlimited Merdazine chapter, deer. And would you please have Chairman Lauber draw for Delia list?
120.
Number 120 is Ducks Unlimited Western Kansas,
Right.
deer. I just want you to know, these come in, as the permits come in, they're numbered as they come in. So there may be a group of Ducks Unlimited chapters that come in, and then there's several other things come in, and then another Ducks Unlimited chapter, but there are more Ducks Unlimited chapters in the state than any other organization. So that's why it leans a lot towards Ducks Unlimited.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Sheila. Richard.
Thank you, Chairman Lauber and Commissioners. It just came up a couple of minutes ago. My name is Rich Schulteis. I'm an Assistant Director in the Wildlife Division, Station Emporium, also staff member responsible for webless migratory game bird regulations. I'm joining you today to introduce the process for webless migratory game birds for the 2023-24 regulation cycle. Regulations for doves, cranes, snipe, rails, woodcocks, and crows must adhere to federal frameworks similar to the process we follow for waterfowl that we're probably pretty familiar with. Unlike waterfowl, however, stability in the federal frameworks for those species allows us to include our webless migratory game bird seasons and bag limits in our permanent regulations. For the 2023-24 seasons, there have been no changes to those federal frameworks that we must adhere to for webless species. We are not anticipating any proposed changes to webless regulations as far as seasons and bag limits, but the final staff recommendations will be presented at the March Commission meeting. A summary of the potential 23-24 season dates and limits under the current regulations is provided in your briefing book item at the bottom of the page there. Finally, I just wanted to mention while I was up here that the issue came up previously regarding crows and wanton waste in public lands is not a new issue. It's come up at times before, and it's a difficult issue to wade through sometimes as far as the regulations, interpretations, and those types of things. So I'm happy to discuss further with the individual that had the question and talk to the commission about it in the future as well. It's something we've tackled in the past as well, and we're always happy to look at if there's new and better ways to resolve some of those issues. We're happy to do so. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Commissioners Ford, I'm just looking on the internet and under crows, legally taken crows may be possessed without limit in time and may be disposed of in any manner. That's the reg, or I guess that's not the reg. That's what it says on the internet.
Was that a question?
No.
Okay.
That's what it says.
Mr. Chair, this is Brad Lovelace. Just for clarification, we've got Larry Hastings, our captain, law enforcement back there, and Rich up here, and a lot of folks with a lot of experience. How often do these kind of things come up with crows? Do you have a sense for that historically?
Every few years or so, we'll have a question about crows. Specifically, where it usually comes up with is on public lands, and where you have multiple users. And the issue that comes up, of course, is leaving them on public lands and how that's interpreted as far as the regulations as correct. Crows are handled differently than most of our migratory birds that we hunt. And as far as the wanton waste issue there, so the regulations are a little bit different than if it was a duck or a pheasant or something like that. But there are still some things that pertain to them, as far as leaving anything out on a public wildlife area, your shell hulls, your lunch garbage, anything in there. So I think there's some things there that I think, I'm not the person to interpret regulations as far as law enforcement is concerned, but yeah, it has come up in the past. And a lot of times it is a very similar situation to what this one was on public wildlife areas, public lands.
Any more questions for Rich?
Well, I guess I'd follow that discussion. Is this the time and place to consider the disposal question? And because I mean, the comments that the person made are pretty valid. I mean, even if they're rare, one time on public lands, visible to visitors on a public land is an impression that is not a good one, and certainly isn't helpful to the ethics of hunting. And so I think we would want, even if the situations are rare, I think we'd want a little bit of urgency on dealing with something like that. So the question is, when and how do we go about doing that?
Yeah, Stuart Strug, Commissioner Gefeller. So that, let me start by saying that unfortunately on public lands, it's not necessarily always just crow issues.
Yeah.
Public lands, unfortunately, are the dumping grounds for a lot of things. And so the best manner in which we discuss this and move this forward and address this, like I had mentioned earlier, public lands and law enforcement division officers getting together, talking about this issue and what the best approach is. Should we look at amending regulations, adding regulations, and the enforceability of that? And so if the commission advised that they would like us to pursue that, then that would be the direction that I would recommend, is that we discuss that internally between those two divisions on amending, adding regulation, and how we would enforce that, what the enforcement would look like.
I think that would make
Right.
sense to go ahead and do that.
Okay, we can for sure do that. And like Rich said too, it kind of depends on county attorney to county attorney and how they view trash, littering, things like that. We can try to enforce that under our littering regulations. Obviously, the other trash we do, there's still some gray areas in certain county attorneys' minds on the shell holes, but that's actually an issue that public lands has been talking about on public lands of shotgun shell holes. So yeah, it depends on the county attorney, but if it's a severe case like that, we can always make the case and present it to the court and let them decide on is a pile of crows like that littering along with the totality of the evidence there with the other trash. So
Okay, that's a good plan, but the language Commissioner Spore referred to, is there any way to take away that no disposal requirement, however, I forgot how it read, but
any means.
yeah, disposal by any means. Can we remove that language and then deal with the whole public lands?
Yeah, it's.
go ahead. Rich.
Yeah, as far as crows, it's something we can certainly look into. There's wanton waste in crows in the history of crow depredation, control, sport hunting. There's a long history as far as crow hunting and some complex issues there, but we can certainly take a look at that and, you know, try and provide you a little more background and look at some options.
I'm sure the intent of the language is you don't have to eat them if you don't want to.
Right.
But that doesn't mean leave them littering, I guess. I don't think that was the intent.
Fair point, for sure.
Commissioner Sill, I read that as the implication is that they will be disposed of and not just left remaining. Now they can go in your trash can instead of the fridge, but to me, there's an implication there that you will be responsible for it in addition to just the ethics of it.
Commissioner Cross, I'm just curious, is there any other animal that we deal with that issue?
The one that comes to mind for me, there are some components of animals, fur bearer circumstances. Is that correct, Matt? As far as meat from fur bearing animals that might fall?
That don't have the wanton waste law, but there's a few of them that are taken in blocks like that, I guess. Roots that might be disposed of in that manner.
Maybe some language like it can be disposed of in any manner, but not left in the field. I don't know, something like that. Look into it and see what you can do, because I think it merits some discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, public lands and law enforcement will for sure include Rich and his staff in this conversation as well.
Any other questions for Rich?
Thank you.
Go ahead. Tom? And Tom, before you get started with your presentation, reiterate the time sequence or the timing of when this gets from workshop to public hearing and what meetings those are, so we'll know how much time between now and when we have to vote.
So today is our scoping meeting. Staff recommendations will be presented at the March Commission meeting, and then there'll be for consensus vote for the April meeting, and the season dates are due to the Fish and Wildlife Service May 1st.
Okay, so we will vote on ducks in April, and in March, we'll have the first staff recommendations.
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Tom Pedrowski, Waterfowl Program Manager. And today we'll be covering season dates, bag and possession limits for the 23-24 to waterfowl seasons. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with input from the flyway councils, and to develop frameworks from which states are able to establish migratory game bird hunting seasons. These frameworks establish maximum bag limits and possession limits, season lengths, and the earliest and latest closing dates. States must operate within these frameworks when establishing state-specific migratory game bird hunting seasons. A briefing item was prepared in the commission packet regarding development of Kansas 23-24 waterfowl seasons. Included other proposed U.S. Fish and Wildlife season frameworks and other pertinent background materials. There are no proposed changes in the federal frameworks from previous years. Again, as this is the scoping process, staff recommendations will be presented at the March Commission meetings. That I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Tom? Okay. Go on.
That's all I have for today.
That's all we have. At the risk of picking a scab, have other commissioners received complaints from Southeast Kansas this winter? I have not yet.
No.
Negative.
I've gotten none from anywhere.
None here.
None.
All right, none here.
We did have a little bit of a different migration year this year. Again, we've also gone to kind of a framework for how staff recommendations come with their seasons, where it does have a shifting season framework for this year. So next year would probably be slightly different than altered than what we had this season. And that's covered on, I think, the third page of your briefing book item.
Troy, you probably hunt more ducks than all of us together. Have you heard much?
I haven't heard anything from the Southeast Kansas boys.
Okay.
We're still getting pressure on public lands. I went from harvesting 800 ducks a year at Cedar Bluff to 3 years ago, I had 80. Last year I had 40, and I'm at 14 this year. So my duck hunting career is just about over with. Non-resident plates around the lake are 10-1. I saw one local hunter this year hunting ducks on Cedar Bluff. The rest of them were non-residents. Had them go so far as wanted to rent my cabin and my side-by-side.
Well,
needing a place to live and needing the side-by-side to go chase ducks.
well, we want them to get plenty of ducks. Okay, any other comments for Tom? For the commission?
Is there anything that is helpful for us to know in thinking about and preparing to listen to your recommendations at the next meeting? As far as the impacts of drought, as far as the impacts of Cheyenne Bottoms being basically shut down, did that push hunters other places? How has that impacted things? Is there some history that we need to know today that will help us be prepared to be wise as we listen at the next meeting?
I'll provide a kind of a season synopsis of what that with this year. I think drought conditions through most of Kansas. We just finished up flying the midwinter waterfowl survey, and like even in southeast Kansas, probably only about 40% of the wetlands had water in them. So that not only displaced a lot of hunters, it displaced a lot of ducks and geese as well. Geese were kind of seen in abnormal places from this year. Part of that is from the drought, from the weather patterns, but also probably particularly for hunting pressure. So there's kind of a lot that went into our migration. We had some weather events that moved birds early through the year. And those birds quickly wised up once they came to Kansas, and for once it stayed around.
Did those factors impact situations like Mr. Sporer is seeing with pushing hunters to places where the water was and the ducks were, like the guys and the gals that normally hunt Cheyenne Bottoms? Did they just take a year off, or did they go somewhere else? Did that exacerbate what he's been seeing in his little pocket of the world? I mean, there's multiple factors there, but I'm just curious, especially the Cheyenne Bottoms thing. Where'd those guys and gals go?
Both resident and even more so non-resident hunters are highly mobile. They're going to go where the ducks go. And that was based mostly on permanent water sources, like some of the reservoirs and some of those places in the state that have more reliable water sources. So that greatly did place them. We did see a drop in our non-resident duck sales, or at least preliminary sales, went down from 42% last year down to 34% this year, which is where it was about 5 years ago. But duck hunters, again, are highly mobile. The Bottoms usually has about 12,000 hunters that got displaced this year. There was literally no hunting at Cheyenne Bottoms for waterfowl this year because of its conditions. It's the second time in 15 years that it's been dry.
Okay.
The people that normally would go to the Bottoms ended up at Cedar Bluff. The majority of them, and they'll tell you that. Generally speaking, the Bottoms would close the second weekend in December, and those people that were hunting there would then come to Cedar Bluff or Wilson or Webster or one of those areas. But what's changed with waterfowling and the pressure is so intense on public lands that ducks become nocturnal early. Early in the season, they'll be nocturnal before Thanksgiving, maybe even before that, after the first week of the season. And they will set on the refuge and they will not come out to feed till sunset. And they're it's just an unhuntable population of ducks. It's just virtually, you cannot hunt them because they're either in the refuge on the daylight or they go out to feed at night. And it's just changed the whole idea of waterfowling on public lands has changed because of so much pressure. I guess I question, I value a duck and think a duck ought to be able to live. But 30,000 ducks at Cedar Bluff that sit on refuge all day and then feed at night, that's not duck hunting. That's bird watching. But until we curve the pressure on public lands, nothing's going to change.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a request. Last time we did this, you brought some very good data on resident, non-resident, and specific data to some of the wildfowl areas in the state, the pressure and at the various places. And I know we're going to have that discussion again. So I would just ask that you refresh that data, update it where you can, and make it part of your presentation.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Stuart Strong again. We're probably due for another roundtable discussion coming up to include updated numbers. And Ryan Stuckey's going to be talking about this and I as well talking about this and under the public lands regulations. We have some comments too. So some of the things you've brought up, hopefully we'll be able to address better here coming up shortly.
All right, good, thanks.
Any other questions for Tom? Okay,
Thank you.
Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. So we're opening the fur bearer regulations back up for discussion and review and public comment. These are permanent regulations that are not brought forward every year, although they were brought forward last year, but we're specifically bringing them up again this year to fulfill the department's commitment to review the night vision coyote hunting season after the third year. And so that season, the third one of those night vision seasons is currently open until the end of March. Our timeline is that we will conduct the hunter survey in early April, probably the 1st of April, and then get that data analyzed. And then we'll have a discussion in-house and bring back to the commission sometime probably at the April meeting, although I'm not sure what the specific dates of the April meeting are, but we'll try to get the survey and analysis done to bring back recommendations in April on the night vision season going forward. The Fur Bearer Committee will also be looking at other aspects of fur bearer management and fur harvesting, particularly looking for ways that we might facilitate the harvest of fur bearers, given some of the comments and the interest people have expressed in this time of a low pelt market. So for today, we're not making any recommendations, just getting this back in front of the commission and the public and letting you know that we will be getting into these discussions in the coming meetings. I can give you a couple little bits of information from the first two seasons of the night vision permit. And I may have mentioned these before, but it's worth mentioning again. Between the first and second year of the night vision season, the number of night vision permits that were sold decreased by 25% from 5,776 down to 4,351. I think the reason for that is a lot of people who either bought the permit and then didn't hunt or weren't successful like they thought they might be, didn't purchase it the second year. And about 80% of those permit hunters are active. So there are about 3,500
active night vision hunters during last season. That's what there were. And that is out of a total of about 35,000 estimated coyote hunters total in the state. So about 10% of your coyote hunters purchased and used the night vision hunting permit. The night vision hunters are generally appear to be a little bit more effective than daytime hunters. They took an average this second year of about 7.8 coyotes total during that night vision season, whereas your average daytime hunter in recent years would take 3.5 to 4 coyotes. It's also, and I say it appears that they're more effective. It's certainly likely that you're more committed and dedicated coyote hunters who would have harvested more than your daytime average during their own daytime hunts, or the ones who are participating in the night vision season. And so some more analysis could be done on that. And then the other thing is that the effectiveness of night vision hunters themselves increased quite a bit from the first to the second year. And that is because the use of equipment changed from decreased by 24%. The number of hunters who use lights decreased, and the number of hunters of night vision permit holders who used thermal imaging equipment increased by 21%. And so the hunters who are buying the permit are gravitating towards the most effective lighting technique, which is the thermal imaging equipment. Yeah, I think so. There's just a couple tidbits. Of course, I have a lot more information from the survey, which I'll present in more detail at a future meeting. There is, of course, a lot of interest by the people who have these permits in expanding their opportunity. They want to be able to take more than just coyotes for more than 3 months on more than just private land. And, they basically want this completely opened up, whereas there is some opposition to this out there still. And this House bill that Dan mentioned was news to me, but I have heard from a few other people still, including a daytime coyote hunter who thinks that the nighttime hunting makes his life a lot more difficult as a daytime hunter. So not everybody out there supports it. And we will have a lot of different things to consider in the future and in the coming meetings. So with that, I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, anecdotally, I heard this week that Iowa is considering opening up the raccoon season year round. Are you aware of that?
I had not heard that.
Okay. Maybe it's worth checking into.
Okay, yeah.
Whatever they do, they can do. And we don't have to do it. But
right.
I think they are responding to a comparable problem of too many raccoons. So assuming that's accurate.
Yeah, Commissioner Spore, Matt, what happened to the fur trade? What's the economics of it? Why?
Well, I think our foreign relations with China and Russia have not been good. And then the worldwide economy as a result of COVID is very detrimental for what in some cases is a luxury item. In other cases, like our raccoon, you primarily would go to Russia as a utilitarian coat that people wore for warmth in extremely cold climates. And so there is a utilitarian component too, but there's all types of worldwide market and trade things that go into this. There's also I think that the opposition to fur may have gained some traction in some places. So for several years there was a really good coyote market, and it was primarily going to Canada goose coats. And then Canada goose quit using wild fur on their jackets. And so now the coyote market has crashed. There's a couple of good things in the market right now. One decent thing, and this is sort of anecdotal, that I've heard that as a result of the Yellowstone series, there's a real interest in Stetson cowboy hats. And Gerald, you know what those are made out of? The good ones are made out of beaver felt. And so there's a really good market that, well, I shouldn't say really good. It's probably still below the cost of production, but you can at least, you have a decent market relative to other things for beaver that that are going to the hatter market. And so little things like that crop up. Our bobcats have been decent in Kansas lately because they've been being used in my understanding is bedspreads that the heavier Western cats are too heavy for. And so there are little things like that that crop up that sort of make some little ups and downs for individual species. But as a whole, the large scale fur trade has a lot to do with what's going on with other countries. Like when the market was good 10 years ago, China was a major buyer of almost all wild fur, and now they've sort of left. It's also worth mentioning that North American Fur Auctions, which was originally the Hudson Bay Company and it had been in business for 350 years, went bankrupt a couple of years ago. And so we lost one of the two major North American auction houses, and it was out of Canada. But that was a big hit to the industry. The COVID thing has not to go on and on, give you more information than you wanted, but real quickly, the COVID issue resulted in depopulating a bunch of mink farms, which you might think is as competition with the wild fur industry, but a lot of the worldwide pro fur marketing was funded by the ranch mink industry, and the ranch fur industry constitutes 85% of the worldwide fur trade. So when some of those countries lost 17 million mink, they also lost money into the International Fur Federation and some of these groups that promote fur use worldwide. And so there's a series of things going on right now, and they all seem to be detrimental. Or most of them, I should say. I guess the Yellowstone series is good for business, but
Yeah, my concern is the upland game. We're going to be in a fight for our lives to keep upland game at a huntable level in the next several years with the drought that we had. I'm very concerned about the increased population of raccoons and the deprivation of the nesting. I guess I would like to hear in a future meeting how true that is and how big a deal that is. Are the coons getting our turkeys, and are they getting our pheasant and quail eggs? You know, is that a viable situation? Is that something that, you know, that we need to take over as far as night vision, you know, to take some of the stress off of our upland game species? I guess I'm asking.
I'd be interested in a more refined analysis of it. I think the short answer is they have an effect. Whether or not they're the reason, it's hard to say. But there is certainly a balance problem between raccoons and game birds.
Mr. Chair, I might comment in general. We'll be glad to follow up with a more thorough discussion. This is a big discussion, but as I listen to our biologists, they typically all start with habitat. If you have adequate habitat, then predators have a difficult time hunting it thoroughly. And so there's room left for birds to nest safely and raise young and all that. As you squeeze the habitat, then it's easier to work by a single coyote or a coon. And so it makes a tough situation worse. So we typically talk long and hard about better habitat. And if you look at the programs we do with on our own lands and on private lands across the state, that's always our focus, is better and more habitat. But with that, I will promise you that we will loop back to this and have a discussion on it next time and talk about the role of predators, because they do play a role. But we'll talk about the role and our perspective on the best approach to manage.
Okay.
You know, we don't have any control over the rain. You know, you're not going to make it rain and you're not going to make the habitat, but maybe there is an opportunity to take a piece of property that normally had 3 to 4 coons on it that now has 30 to 40 coons on it, maybe that's the only opportunity that we have to control this is predation. I mean,
Yeah.
I get the habitat
Yeah.
issue, but it's just something that we can't control that right.
Reduced habitat coupled with more nest raiders
Right.
is a bad formula.
Yeah, when there's more coyotes in fragmented patch than there are pheasants, I believe that's an imbalance.
So one bit of data to share with you. Well, two, actually. You may have been aware a couple of years ago, South Dakota was passing out traps to encourage people to trap more. And they spent, I think their budget was $1 million, and they quickly spent that on traps, got out. They didn't notice any changes that I'm aware of as a state. The other thing though, and this is almost anecdotal, but we visited with a landowner down in Butler County who had considerable land holdings, was worried about upland bird management, mainly quail. And that person, I think, had been actively trapping predators, nest predators for almost 20 years, right? Very consistently had their own help. So they hired people to do this year after year. And they saw a very consistent harvest, but it never, based on harvest levels, never really knocked them down. What happened was, and Matt's the expert on this, but what happened in their case was that they kept harvesting these predators, but when you create a vacuum, right, the neighboring predators come in. And so it seemed very consistent that they weren't able to get it below that kind of baseline level, even though they worked very hard at it for a couple decades. So I don't know if Matt would comment on that or not.
I don't know if we can harvest enough coons to make a quick difference.
Amen.
I mean, we could liberalize the heck out of it, make some, but basically it shows we're doing something. And maybe we just, well, I don't know. You guys come up with some recommendations. That's some discussion points.
Okay.
I would think there's a pretty direct relationship between habitat shrinking and predation problems increasing because the safe zones are smaller and the predators have an easier job. And I'm curious how you deal with that, because we may have to assume that habitat is what it is. I mean, it's influenced by federal programs more than anything, CRP and other things. So we can't really influence. So maybe we have to assume the worst and manage to that.
Yeah, but we're glad to talk about our Habitat First program, which is a great way to put better habitat on the land with cooperating landowners. So we're glad to address that.
Okay. Yes.
I have one comment, one question too. I would like to see that expand so that we're looking at it not just from the silos of, I mean, habitat goes across the board, but we've got upland, we've got fur bearers. There's more to the discussion too, and some hard topics to discuss, like what do deer feeders, whether it's baiting or feeding, what impact do those do? You have decreasing habitat, you've got increasing congregations and food resources within that habitat. So their habitat's decreasing, but their food sources are rampant. So please address it, the full scope of it, and not in too many siloed approaches, if you understand what I mean. Matt, back to the night vision and coyotes, I had one question. The demographics of those night vision hunters, are they spread equally across the state? Do they tend to be in some specific regions of the state that they're operating and being successful? What does that demographic of those hunters look like?
I have not done any analysis on their location. So I'd have to look into that for you, but I can do that.
I would be curious as to where they are hunting and being successful, if it's statewide or in certain pockets.
My feeling is that it's statewide based on people I've talked to who have mentioned it going on around them from the far east to the far west. And so I know there's some people statewide, whether it varies from your, the group of coyote hunters as a whole, I don't know the answer.
Thank you. And thank you for your explanation of the fur trade. That was
Sure.
enlightening.
All right, well, let's move on here to public land regulations.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Ryan Stuckey, the Public Lands Assistant Director. This is the time of year when we propose any new changes, updates, or edits, additions to the public lands regulations. We don't have anything for today. We still have 4 that are in workshop, have been in workshop now for, I think today is actually the 7th time. And some of those will be talked about later. But I do want to mention that we are having internal talks about several different issues. And one of the main issues being discussed continues to be the concern of too much hunting pressure on public lands and a relative negative impacts on the resource and the hunter satisfaction. I know Stuart wants to mention a couple of things that he's been working on for the last year and a half on reaching out to other states to see what they're doing. And you want to go ahead and
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I just wanted to follow up on what Ryan's alluding to. When this conversation started a couple of years ago, when we started really seeing the influx of non-residents and the overpressure issue started to really come in and come to light. We made the decision back then, we're not in the business of making knee-jerk decisions. We're all about evaluating things and looking at numbers and listening to staff out in the field. And, but we also made the commitment to keep evaluating this and looking at it over the next, over the coming years. And one of the questions was, is this a point in time because of the pandemic, or is this the new norm? And from what I'm hearing from staff and what Ryan and I are seeing in the field, we believe it's probably the new norm. And when we're hearing, and even the secretary is hearing, that we're now the new Arkansas when it comes to waterfowl hunting, we need to look at really taking some action. So what's been occurring, staff has continued to discuss this, and we're at the point now where, again, I want to emphasize, this isn't an overcrowding issue that we're talking about. This, like Commissioner Sporer alluded to, this is an overpressure issue. It's not that we have too many hunters' bodies in the marshes. It's what we've seen is a switch in the culture over the last couple of years with the non-resident culture. And what I'm talking about is an influx of a group of 6 to 8 to 12 individuals coming from out east in several truckloads that stay there 30, 40, 50 days or come out every weekend, and they're there every day, all day, and never leave the marsh and shooting constantly and creating issues for the resource ducks, like Commissioner Sporer said, making them more nocturnal. And that circles back to hunter satisfaction too. So we're at that point where staff is passing around different ideas for recommendations. And for transparency, that, I've heard shot shell limits per property, days per year that non-residents can hunt, allotting the first couple of weeks of each segment to residents only. A whole host of things have been discussed. But one of the things we really have to take into consideration is if we're going to make recommendations, is that going to be through the commission process and the regulation level, or is this something that's going to have to occur at the legislature level under state statute, which is going to be more time consuming and could take a lot longer to get passed and implemented on the ground. So I just wanted to kind of update you on where we're at, what we're looking at, what we're talking about. And with that, I'd take any questions.
Commissioner Sporer, I saw this numerous times this year on several different areas. A group of non-resident hunters would come in, 2 pickup loads, say 3, 4, 5, 6 guys would hunt public lands for 4 or 5 days. And they had, had a day or two that they were successful. And then they would go back to their home state, do whatever they were going to do. But they had a whole nother circle of friends that came behind them. And they were dropping them pins as to where the good spot was to hunt. So scouting wasn't even a part of it. They could step right in and start hunting immediately. So technology has changed how those people, how they do that versus me going to state and I don't know the public lands and I got to scout for 2 days before I get a hunt for 2 days. So it's just a difference in technology and how they hunt. If they're not hunting, they're hunting for a place to hunt. And how you hunt for a place to hunt on public lands is get in your motorized boat and drive the banks of the lake. And what you do is you push all the birds out of what I would think would be a good hunting spot. And then they just move the birds around. And pretty soon all the birds end up on a refuge where there's basically no hunting. I had one situation this year. I spent a couple days looking and I finally found a couple hundred mallards in a cove. Well, I was pretty excited. It was Monday and I thought, well, I'm going to go make sure they're there Tuesday and then I'm going to hunt them Wednesday. Well, so I went over to check on them on Tuesday by land in a vehicle. So I didn't scare them. Tuesday, when I got there, there was already some people from Arkansas had already found them and was hunting them. So obviously I didn't get a hunt, but it's just a very aggressive style of hunting. And it doesn't take a lot on a 6,000 acre reservoir. It doesn't take but 1 or 2 groups hunting that way to put the birds into a situation where they become nocturnal and they're just impossible to hunt. And nocturnal birds didn't happen this year. They've been doing it for years, but they wouldn't get nocturnal till say Christmas. And then they would kind of go into the refuge and get nocturnal. Today, as some of the refuge managers last year in our roundtable made the comment that the birds were nocturnal when they got to their area. So it's relatively new concept. It's been coming on, but it's just it's something that we need to address because it's different than it used to be. Thank you.
So where we go from here then, we've been talking to other states, Arkansas, the Dakotas, and getting, dialogue between those states and what's working for them, what isn't working for them to help us move this forward. And so for what I foresee is getting to a point where internally we've had the conversations and vetted it, clear up through myself and Secretary Lovelace and Rich and Tom and everybody that should be involved to actually have a sound plan in place with some potential recommendations, whether that be regulatory through the commission process or state statute. And then at that point, I think it would be wise for us to have another panel discussion to bring those forward and to discuss those.
Okay. Any other questions for these two gentlemen?
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention too, we have made some changes over the past couple of years with the boating regulations at the bottoms and the entering the marsh at Neosho. So we have been making some successful impacts, and that has worked. But if we do truly believe this is the new norm, then we need to take that further and keep this moving forward.
Okay.
Commissioner Spore, I've been trying to get you guys to stop the waterfowl counts ever since I got on this commission, and I haven't been successful. I'm going to encourage the commission and staff to dig into the waterfowl counting system and how the refuge managers do that. You go to the website, you click on hunting, you go to reports and forecasts, and then you can look at each region and you can look at it. And what you see there is if you have a public lands area where the public lands manager is a duck hunter, the counts are softball. They just virtually don't have a count. And then others just basically give a conditions report. And then all of a sudden, you've got one land manager that throws up 20 and 30,000 every week consistently. Where are you going to go as a young man from Arkansas? Are you going to go to Tuttle Creek where they're counting 800? Are you going to go to Jamestown where they won't give a count? Travis and Monty are not counting down at Neosho. They quit counting last year after we had this conversation. But you get that one person that gives that big count, and it causes that public lands to get overpressured quickly. And I just think it's time to stop the waterfowl count. I know there was a concern last year about what do you do with the secretaries within the office when all these hunters are calling, wanting to know how many ducks or how many geese are in the area. It's simple. They just say, we don't know. We quit responding to it. It might be a good idea if you come scout and look for yourself. That might be the way the local people do it. I guess I'm just very disheartened about why we continue. We're having a conversation about over pressuring wetlands. And here we have these big numbers coming out, and it just makes it worse. It's not helping our cause.
Commissioner Spore, I assure you that that conversation continues to occur within the Public Lands Division, and is part of this conversation and decision-making as we move forward. You know, we have varying opinions amongst our wetland managers on those waterfowl reports. So it is discussed quite frequently, and that will be a part of this project, if you will, moving forward. Those conversations will continue.
I just think that's something that you guys could do tomorrow. You don't have to have legislative approval, or you don't have to have commission approval. You just.
But we also get a slew of complaints if we don't post those numbers too. So we have to weigh all the arguments in the discussion.
Well, obviously, it's not important to post the numbers because over half of the refuge managers aren't posting a number. They just give a conditions report. I mean, they're not giving a number. They just say hunting is poor.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute break. And we'll come back and Levi will enlighten us.
Jason.
You're right about it. Says discouraged.
if your chapter's one. And you guys can individually apply. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be Chris. Okay? Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, Levi, you want to talk to us about military deer seasons?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Levi Jaster, Big Game Coordinator, Emporia Research and Survey Office.
It's gonna go quick.
This is Regulation 115-25-9A, which sets deer season variations on our military subunits. This is the first time we've heard this year. It gets introduced today. And then typically we've voted on this in June. And this is out of sync with our with 115-25-9, which is our statewide seasons, to allow for setting the seasons around the military mission needs on those units, in case they have something going on that would prevent access for seasons. And so with that, I will start with the Smoky Hill subunit. They've just requested to be the same as statewide season dates, utilize those. And at Smoky Hill subunit 4A, the same as the unit they're in, they can use up to 5 whitetail antlerless permits. Fort Riley this year, they are requesting some additional days of antlerless firearms deer hunting from November 24th through November 26th. And then their regular firearms dates would be December 16th through December 23rd. And then they will follow the statewide seasons otherwise, which is a little bit of a change from the past years. And then on Fort Riley, a hunter can only use 1 antlerless whitetail deer permit. And then for Fort Leavenworth, they'll be using statewide seasons, except that their open firearm season is for the taking during November 11th through November 12th, November 18th through November 19th, November 23rd through November 26th, December 2nd through December 3rd, and December 9th and December 10th. Still 12 days like our regular statewide season, just different dates. And then they will fall into the extended antlerless season in January 1st, 2024 through January 21st. And also to utilize the extended archery season for antlerless whitetail deer from January 22nd through January 31st. And then a deer hunter can use up to 5 whitetail antlerless only permits on Fort Leavenworth, which is subunit 10A. And so those are the proposed dates for the military subunits. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Levi? Any questions from the commission at all? Well, you did a great job.
Thank you.
You did all your talking earlier. Jake?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Jake George. I'm the Wildlife Division Director. And we drew straws, and I was the one who was lucky enough to get to come talk to you guys about revenue shortfalls and potential fee increases. So I'm glad to see you all again in this new year. I'm not going to be making any specific recommendations today. Those will be in subsequent meetings, but I'd like to lay some of the groundwork for the reason we're looking at some specific fee increases, as well as what we've been doing in the past to keep things going in light of the revenue shortfalls that we've been seeing for several years. So with that, I'll go through this and then have an opportunity for any questions at the end. So as you guys know, we are a fee-funded agency, meaning that the funds that we have to work with are the ones that we generate from our hunting and fishing for harvesting license sales. We've seen increasing costs, just like everybody else has. I know that I have. You go to the grocery store, you see it, you fill your vehicle up, you see it, you try and buy a vehicle, you just give up. So we, between vehicles, increased cost on vehicles, fuel costs, and most especially construction costs, between labor shortages and increased materials costs. A lot of our capital improvement projects, which we have a significant backlog of at the moment, our bids are coming in at anywhere from 2 to 4 times what we had originally estimated and budgeted for those projects. Some of those projects we're having to reprioritize because of that and are being put on hold. And other ones we're attempting to move forward with, but trying to get those costs as low as possible. In addition to that, necessary and appreciated, the cost of living adjustments that we receive, they do increase the cost to us though. And again, those cost of living adjustments don't come with additional cash. So we're still utilizing the same revenue for those increased costs, which any of those are absolutely necessary and appreciated from a recruitment and retention of our employees in the current job market, but just another increasing cost that we're currently seeing. So from a budget planning standpoint, what we attempt to do when we're looking at future years is to identify the needs when we're developing our fee fund request. So the way that process works is we put together what we anticipate for needs for salary, O&M, and capital improvements, and those requests go to the legislature and as well as the governor's office for approval, and we get an appropriation from that. So that gives us the spending authority to utilize a certain amount of those funds in any given fiscal year. The last several years, we have not been spending the full amount of our spending authority, our appropriation from the Wildlife Fee Fund. On average, we've only been spending about 85% of that. The reasoning behind that is because our annual revenue is less than our appropriation. So the easy way of looking at that, I guess, is that if we were to expend the full amount that we're authorized by the legislature to spend on an annual basis from the Wildlife Fee Fund, we would be slowly chipping away at the Wildlife Fee Fund balance that we're currently maintaining. So as fiscally responsible individuals, we have been limiting ourselves essentially to what we've been bringing in at revenue and keeping it fairly neutral and not eating away at that Wildlife Fee Fund balance. To the contrary, we've actually been able to build it up some over the last several years, despite rising costs. Some of that, as I identified in the briefing book narrative, is due to us finding alternative funding sources, either to fund projects or fund some staff time to alleviate pressure on Wildlife Fee Fund. So the long story short, there is what we have is a revenue shortfall. If we're attempting to accomplish what it is that we've identified in any fiscal year, we're currently running, and that's both salaries, O&M, and capital improvements. We're currently running a revenue shortfall of anywhere between $4 to $6 million on an annual basis, and have been for the last several years. So I was tasked with the identifying solutions to this shortfall. And that brings us to discussions on the fees that we're currently charging as the sole source for the Wildlife Fee Fund revenue that we generate. The statutes, which are included in your briefing books as well, specify both caps and some specific levels at which we can establish fees for licenses and permits. So the initial task was to review the statutes and identify, in comparing those to where our current fee regulations are set for specific licenses and permits, where we have the ability to make increases and where we do not. I guess it was an interesting exercise, and out of that came both pluses and minuses. The plus was that there are not many of our current fees that are already at the statutory caps, with the exception of resident hunting, fishing, and fur harvesting licenses, we do have room for increases essentially across the board to some extent. Now, the downside to that is that leaves a whole lot of options for fee increases. And as something that's never popular, being faced with a lot of options, we do not want to take this exercise lightly and go just an across the board increase. We didn't feel that that would be appropriate. Because of this, we're going to be developing specific recommendations that consider several things, including impacts to residents versus non-residents, current level of demand for specific licenses and permits. And those were what we will be coming forward in future meetings to you with, are those specific recommendations. So in the meantime, what we would like to do is alleviate the shortfall, which again, we've had for several years now. We've been implementing cost-cutting measures to make ends meet and try to be fiscally responsible still with respect to the wildlife fee fund. But at some point, something is going to have to give with the increasing prices. And that $4 to $6 million shortfall that we need to make up for is really only going to get us to where we need to be now, not necessarily where we need to be in the future. So this will not be the end to some of these discussions, but rather the beginning, and hopefully a more frequent review of what we have for our regulations on fees going forward. To give you a little bit of history on that, 2015 and 16 is when we reviewed and made some of the last major changes to the licenses and permits. And prior to that, the last time that the actual fee caps were changed with the legislature was in 2002. Prior to the changes to some of our permit types, such as resident deer and turkey permits, those were modified in 2015 and implemented in 2016. The last time those were changed before that was 1986. So 30 years is a long time to go with no increases, even when you're talking about normal inflation, when that's your sole source of revenue. So something that we need to do a better job of monitoring and keeping up with. So with that, I'd stand for any questions, and I look forward to the future discussions with you guys.
Any questions for Jake?
I got a comment just to your last point. You know, a big increase is more noticeable than a little one, obviously. So a more regular approach to this, where you have small incremental increases, I think common sense would tell you it's going to be a little better received than waiting 5 years to making a big jump in the fees. So I know we can't change what we've done, but as we move forward with the recommendation, I'd like it to include, you know, more frequent review of it.
Agreed.
I agree with Warren. However, my first boss told me would refer to this as cutting the dog's tail off by inches. And, you know, at some point, you've got a certain amount of flack every time you raise it. And sometimes it's better just to raise it all at once and take your spanking and move on. So I don't know what the answer is.
Make it so it's not noticeable.
Right. Make it so it's painless, not noticeable, and brings us money.
Yeah.
You've got a good point, Jake. Anything else for Jake? All right.
Thank you.
Now we're going to start the workshop. And of course, the largest items down in the workshop are things we've workshopped about 50 times. So some of that is not going to be too long, but this one's a different one, Matt.
Only a couple times on this one, but I do have a little bit of a change since I last presented this regulation. And it's sort of a technical edit to this reg in the way that season dates are described. Rather than providing actual calendar dates in this regulation, we would like to describe a season framework in a way that's not year specific. For example, rather than listing firearm season dates of October 6, 2023 through October 9, 2023, we would list them as the season dates would be from the first Friday in October through the following Monday. And so they would not be year specific. And so that we're making this recommendation due to the changes in the way the regs are going through now. And so the season would be able to proceed even if we had some unexpected delays to the regulation process. And in addition to the season still being held, we would also be able to go ahead with the printing of our regulation summary and the publications, and would be able to advertise season dates. So if some type of a delay happened, we wouldn't be stuck, without an established season date for the coming year. So again, it's kind of a technical thing. The season dates will, they'll effectively remain the same as they have been, but it will allow us to work in the current system with a lot more confidence. And then the one substantial change to the actual regulation that I did present at the last meeting was that we're proposing to eliminate the late archery season, which opens up typically around the 15th of October after the firearm season and muzzleloader seasons have concluded. And I've mentioned before that it's easy for us to reduce harvest of limited permits by reducing permit allocations. So if we want to cut harvest of firearm permits, we just issue fewer firearm permits. But as long as archery is unlimited, we've got to come up with some other way to address them. And this is a good way to still retain unlimited archery opportunity, but cut back on harvest by 8%. So with that, other components of this regulation are standard relative to previous seasons, and we will come up with permit allocations for you at a bit later date. So with that, I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, is there any questions for Matt? Yes, sir.
Would it be possible to cut back on the antelope harvest by restricting the crossbow season to keeping the second season for archery, but limiting crossbows to that season only?
Well,
since they account for what, 28-29% of the archery harvest, does that accomplish the same task?
With only 8% of the harvest coming from that late season, by limiting them, wouldn't have I'm assuming only that would amount to only 1 or 2 animals a year, so that wouldn't get it done. If other bow types are responsible for 70% of the remaining harvest, then 70% of that 8% would still, 6 of the 8 or whatever it is would still be taken.
But I would think that if you move the crossbows to the second season only, that would reduce their efficiency in the first season's taken. Overall, your reduction would happen.
At this time, I don't think we're ready to make any type of move on separating out the archery types. So they're all bows and they're all in the same season, and until the success rates or stuff like that separate out a little bit more. We're still dealing with all of the bow hunters as a single group right now.
My concern when we let crossbows into the archery season was that at some point they would affect the number of days that more traditional archers would be able to hunt, and this appears to be the ramification of that. So we can separate that out again a little bit. That would be at least more satisfying to me.
The number of traditional archers is more than doubled of what it was, and so traditional archers are taking, they have a substantially larger impact on harvest than what they did before too. So crossbows are adding to it, but they're definitely not solely responsible. And as I've mentioned before, the modern compound bow is a lot different than what it was 15 years ago or something. I'm not a bow hunter, but some 10 to 15 years ago or something like that. The compound bow I have is not anything like the compound bows that people are buying new today. I'll say that.
Any more questions for Matt? Let's talk about elk.
Okay. So we're proposing the same technical edit to the season structure for elk as I presented for pronghorn. So again, if there's some unexpected delay in the regulations process, getting this through the commission, the season dates will already be set and we'll be able to handle things as, as we currently do. As far as other components of this regulation, we're not currently recommending any change to the season structure, bag limit, or permit type. And all aspects of the proposed regulation are standard relative to other recent years. And so basically this is no change other than that change, other than the technical edit to the way the seasons are being presented in the regulation itself. So again, I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, any questions on this one for Matt? All right,
Thank you.
Levi again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Levi Jaster, Big Game Coordinator, Emporia, Kansas. So first off, I have the permanent regs for big game, KR 115-4, and I'm going to focus on 11, which is the only one of these that we have a proposed change for. And you should have received a handout I put out earlier. These are some technical edits to clarify some language in this regulation. So this handout, the first page should say current text. That's the regulation text as it stands right now. For the second and third pages, which are the only pages we're making changes to, or proposing changes to. And then the second page of the handout should be what the technical edits will be. The parts are highlighted just to show you the location where those edits would be. The highlight will be removed in the final. And so this is because some of the language that was left in, there were some edits that were made that apparently what the text was supposed to change to is there, but some of the old text was left. And we're also removing some of the unnecessary underlines in places. The other change is that, as Matt mentioned earlier, some of the edits to remove actual dates, such as on number 7 on that first page, where it says October 30th. If you look at number 7 on the second page with the technical edits, it's now going to be the last day of the season. And so this is just to show you kind of what these are going to be, since they were anything that could be easily worked all the way through. So with that, I would take questions.
Are there any questions for Levi on this? Well, okay. You've got the Deer 25 series.
Yes, sir. The Deer 25 series sets our season dates for deer statewide. This typically was the last workshop and is typically voted on in March. We'll see where we are with our processes now. But generally, we are following what we've done in the past, save that in certain units, specifically DMU 12, there's an option to have an extended pre-rut firearm season. It includes the normal 3 days of the pre-rut whitetail antler season in October, 7th, 8th, and 9th, and extends it through the next Sunday, so makes it 9 days. Generally, that season is one that's heavily used by non-residents, or I mean by residents. Non-residents only account for about 3% of hunters that take advantage of that season. But to help with some additional harvest that landowners would like to see down in that area. Otherwise, the youth and disability will be the 2nd of September of 2023 through September 10th. Early muzzleloader will be 11th through the 24th. Archery opens concurrently with muzzleloader on the 11th and then runs through December 31st. The regular pre-rut would be October 7th, 8th, and 9th. The extended pre-rut would be October 7th through the 15th in the units that it would be implemented in. Regular firearm then follows the traditional Wednesday after Thanksgiving, running from November 29th through December 10th. And then the January extended seasons, the first option is the 1st of January 2024 through January 7th. The second is January 1st through January 14th of 2024. And the third is January 1st through January 21 of 2024. And then the extended archery season, which is only occurring in DMU 19, is January 22nd through January 31st of 2024. And with that, I would take questions.
Any questions for Levi on this one?
Are these going to go to dates that are not specified, but like first Wednesday after Thanksgiving?
Yes, that we're going to be moving in that direction.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Levi.
Thank you.
Ryan?
Again, good afternoon, Chairman, members of the commission. Ryan Stuckey, Public Lands Assistant Director, and I'll also be having Jason Deal, Public Lands Regional Supervisor out of Region 3. He covers Central, South Central, and Southeast Kansas Public Lands. And he'll come up and explain a few things here in just a minute. We're workshopping some reference document requests for the 7th time. I didn't join the rest of them because I want to talk about them just a little bit. There were some questions that were brought up at the last commission meeting, and I'd like to be able to address those questions today. So the first one is that we talked about most of our public lands, the department managed lands and waters, the wildlife areas and state fishing lakes, but excluding Maxwell Wildlife Refuge, Big Basin, Prairie Reserve, and all the state parks into the electronic check-in, check-out system. Since we moved from My Sportsman to Brant, we've been experiencing some growing pains, I should say. And so we're still working on some of the issues that have came up in the transfer from one vendor to the other. And so at this time, we're asking to not make any changes to our check-in, check-out system as far as adding any properties. We would like to just leave them as is for now. We'll leave them as an item to be discussed in the future, but until we can get some of the issues worked out with the new vendor, we're asking that not be included to move forward through the process. The second thing, an item, is that we were asking to add 2 properties, refuge areas down to the Cherokee Lowlands, which is south of Mine Lands, the wildlife areas there, and just north of the town of Chitopa. We refer to those properties as the Perkins East and the Bogner. The question was, why do we want to put those in as refuge areas? And Jason is the one that was working with this in the past and working with his managers. And I think he can explain a little better than I could exactly why these have been requested to put in as refuge areas in our reference document. So Jason, if you could maybe explain the transfer of property to us and that.
Thank you, Ryan. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Not all wildlife areas are created equal, but by and large, it is our typical management strategy on our public wildlife areas to have designated refuge areas, primarily to, well, I'm glad the issue of pressure and stressed animals was brought up earlier in the discussion. But that's the reason why we have refuge areas on our public wildlife areas, because they do receive a lot of pressure that gives the animals a place to escape, rest, avoid some of the pressure, and allow some of those animals to remain on the wildlife area landscape rather than being pushed off onto other properties. As it pertains to Cherokee Lowlands Wildlife Area in particular, when we were talking about the Bogner and Perkins, Neosho Wildlife Area is just in pretty close proximity to the north, where we have a refuge designated as well. And Cherokee Lowlands is primarily a wetland and waterfowl area, and migratory birds don't typically hang around very long unless there is an area for them to rest, refuel, recharge, and escape pressure. So not unlike Neosho, where approximately a little over 24% of that area is refuge area. When we designate these properties at Cherokee Lowlands, the Bogner and the Perkins Tract, approximately 18% of the wildlife area will be designated as refuge. And it also serves not only as an escape area for waterfowl to keep them on the landscape, to provide an opportunity to hunters, but our primary goal when it pertains to waterfowl is to give them an area to rest, refuel, recharge, maintain good body condition so they can continue their migration. So that's our primary goal, specifically when it pertains to refuges on waterfowl areas. And with that, I'll stand with any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Jason?
Thank you.
In reference to what Mr. Pete said about the capabilities of these compound bows, we need to reduce the capability of our compound bows. We need to reduce the capability of our firearms. These guys come out here with a 300 Weatherby to shoot a little 250-pound deer. In the military, I learned 1 kill, 1 shot. These people.
Thanks.
You waving me off?
Well, we've already had that discussion.
No, we haven't, sir.
Well, this is a different topic.
Firearms.
I'm 60 and I can't pull back a compound bow these guys are shooting. So that's kind of self-induced.
Any other questions for Jason?
You ain't got it no more, do you?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
I know what you mean. Can't do what you.
Now, Dan, are you going to talk about the rest of these?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
We have got 9 on the list in the category of pending regulations. Not on.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There we go. We've got 9 on the agenda today in the category of pending regulations. And as we discussed previously, those are regulations that are not being actively workshopped anymore because they've been to the commission already. And the purpose of what I'm about to tell you is just to tell you where those regulations are in the process at this time. The first 3 listed there are 115.823, 115.8.9, and 115.825. Those are public lands regulations that deal with a prohibition on baiting, regulations related to camping, and a prohibition on trail cameras and other devices. Those 3 regs are in the public comment period now. They'll be open for a public hearing at the March commission meeting. The date of that is March 9th. That hearing set at 12 o'clock at that time. And I wanted to emphasize again that the public comment period is open on these now. So anyone that wishes to make public comment on those 3 regs, this is the time to do so. The next regulations on the list are the turkey regs, 115.25.5, 115.25.6, and another change to 115.4.11. Those regulations are in the review process, just completed the first phase of that process. That's the leg of the process with the Department of Administration, and they will now be heading to the Attorney General's office for that part of the process in terms of the review. So we don't have any hearing date established for that yet, because that doesn't happen until they finish the review process. But those are the next ones in the pipeline. Following the turkey regs are some fishing regulations. Those are in the process, still in the works. Those have not been submitted to the Department of Administration because we're still making some of the internal changes to those at this time. Same is true of the next one on the list, 115.18.10, importation and possession of certain wildlife. And also the other fishing reg at the bottom, the 115.7.10, and the reference document associated with that, also still in the works as far as making the internal changes before it's submitted to the review process. Does anybody have any questions about any of those?
Anybody have any questions for Dan? We've sort of beat these around quite a bit. You going to be workshopping them next time, or do you know
Which ones?
any of these?
No, these have already been moved into the next category of the process.
All right.
In fact, the next time you see any of these will most likely be at a public hearing,
Okay.
because
thank
they will go through the review process and then come back to the commission.
you. All right. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Linda?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Last time I had Steve introduce our annual camp permit process. As we're looking at those, we're starting a new year and we've had some complications with our annual camp program. I do have a PowerPoint here I want to talk about on our annual camp, and Jason, I'll let you go to the next one. So the annual camp program was implemented in Kansas State Parks, in the 1980s. And that was done because we needed to get people into our system. Camping was not as high as what it is today. And the intention was that people probably wouldn't use it as often as they are doing it today. And there's only 2 states in the nation that have an annual camp program, and that's Kansas and New Mexico. And we've just started to see a change. Our reservation company is able to track those permits. And if you recall, we're able to do our reservation system now. They're able to track that one in our 14-day. And in the past, we were using our paper permits and seasonal or self-pay, and it was just hard to get a handle on it. But we know now. And we also know through the pandemic, a significant number of users started using that annual camp permit, which is good, but it's with inflation and with other things that we're starting to see cost us more. The annual camp deserved another look. Okay, Jason, I'll go to the next one. So first I wanted to look at how many we sold. And of course, in 2020 and 2021, we sold the most we've ever had. And so you're getting close to 4,500 permits sold in 2021. Those permits are $200 or $250. If you buy them before March, it's $200. After March, it's $250. 22, it came down more to what it normally is, and maybe even a little less than previous years. And so because this was a good time to talk about it, because we didn't have quite so many buy them in 2022. All right, Jason, I'll let you go next. So annual camp revenue. So our revenue on that, but just selling them, you can see we had a significant increase, or 21, what gave us quite a bit of revenue. And that's just for the permit only. And then 22, when our permits went down, we reduced that amount. So that's actual revenue. You take the number of people that bought those times the 200 or 250, And that's the revenue we received. Now that's just a cash revenue and there's always another side to that. So you look at use, that means just camping only, not utilities, just the actual permit. All right, Jason. So this is what's very something to really look at. The average nights used by someone camping. And in 22, those fewer people that bought them started using them at an average of 60 nights, 60 days. That wasn't the intent back when we put the annual camp in there. So you're looking at a significant rise in people coming to our state parks, camping for it, which we're tickled that they're there. But the number of nights used, we are losing significant money. Go one more. So look at the unrealized revenue by us having that annual camp for 22. We're well into 1.2 million unrealized revenue from that annual camp permit. If we would have not had that, this is the amount of money we would have collected. And so when you start looking at that, you have to wonder, as salaries go up, as we continue to put more amenities in our state park system, it's not a feasible option possibly for us anymore. Is this my last slide? My next one? Okay. This is the trick though. We use that annual camp for a seasonal camp program. So we have a seasonal camp program, which allows somebody to have a 30-day contract with us every March through November. It's through a draw and they buy an annual camp and then they're also pay by the month these fees. And so the smaller parks, you know, you can see the group A, those are smaller parks, 300 for one utility, only costs them $371 a month. The bigger parks, which includes El Dorado, a 3 utility is $600 a month, but they also have to buy that annual camp. And so if we did away with the annual camp, we'd be looking at these fees again because it'd be a reduction of what the seasonal program would use. And I had Alan pull the participants of our seasonal camp program. It went down in 22. We had almost 400 users in 2021. In 22, it went to 350, a little over 350. So our revenue for them buying the annual camp, in addition to this, was over $70,000. And I say that because maybe it's not a lot of money in reality, but it's an O&M, or it pays for utilities for someone. And so it does become significant. So is that my last slide?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is our thought, is that we would look at different type of permit for these individuals right here, still have a fee there, and possibly go ahead and do away with our annual camp. We do have a 14-day that we're looking at. We're still trying to hash that through. The 14-day gives them a $2 a night discount. So keep that in mind, because then we started looking at other states and what they charge for their daily camping. And so I look at Oklahoma, Nebraska, Missouri, Colorado, Arkansas, Iowa, and Wyoming. That's the states that kind of surround us. We're at $10 a night camping. That $10 a night, we put it there. We raised it probably before the previous administration, so at least 5-6 years ago. And the $10 is the same as what the Corps of Engineers charges. So we're a little bit different situation, because if somebody has a choice, so they can go to the Corps of Engineers as opposed to Kansas State Parks. But when I look at what other state park systems are charging, we're significantly lower. So you're looking at the lowest, which would be Arkansas, primitive camping is what this is. Nebraska, Missouri, they're at $15 a night, and Kansas is at 10. And then their utilities, when they look at a site that has electric only or some and camping, we're still $2 to $3 a night less than them. Some of them were $10 a night less. And so I wanted to present this to you because it's something that we need to look at. Jake brought up today about fees. Certainly, we're no different. What we did, though, through the pandemic and keeping our fees low for people can participate, it brought out new users. Many of them didn't know how to use a RV. They went and bought one, which is good. But we want them to come back. But I will tell you, I do not believe, and I may be proved wrong, but I don't believe we're going to have some that if we get rid of this or raise our fees that will not come for a while. But when I look at the comparisons towards other states and their number of camping public that continues to be high, I think it's an option we ought to consider. And I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Linda?
When they do, you're still doing where they can get in and sign up the day after New Year's, you're still doing that program where?
So to make the reservation,
Yes.
we did that in December. Mr. Spoyer, I actually heard your comments about people coming in and not using those sites. I think doing away with the annual camp will make that a little bit harder for them to do. They take when we do a launch of our reservation system, they'll buy that annual camp and then make multiple reservations throughout the year. They may not do that quite as much because it's going to cost them a little bit more. So they have to pay that up front, which is good for us. We do have the lowest reservation fee in the nation. But I think doing away with that annual camp, we would look at the 14-day also. The nice thing about it, if the 14 days does give us an option to have a discount for some people that maybe don't want to camp every single night, but they can get the 14-day and still get somewhat of a discount. But I do think that would eliminate that making so many reservations because they're going to have to pay for the actual camping.
Linda, do you track when you have reservations made and people that don't show, that takes that site out of access? Do you track whether that's a annual camp or just a reservation? Do you track that to know if there's a tendency in who tends to not show?
Very good question. Very good question. We are having an analysis right now on why, when they come in, and Kansas, when we looked at that, and they're still running some reports for us, but it's interesting. We would think that we have a high rate of people that don't come and don't get their money back. And typically, if they don't come, they're going to want some type of something back. So we'll give them a refund. The ones that are doing the no-show are not getting that refund back. So we're going to look at exactly that, how many are annual camps or 14-day campers, and then how they're no-showing. Could we change that refund window and the reservation window to where it'd be more appealing of them to let us know, and then we give them some sort of a refund back.
You probably talked to the same person that I did. The complaint I heard was you have to have a 14-day notice to cancel. And the impression I got was, well, why should the state benefit from keeping my money and getting somebody else's? And there didn't seem to be any compassion for the next camper that wanted to use the site. Like it was punishing Parks Department when it's just punishing other campers. So I think, is that part of the same?
It is. So what I would say is other states all across the nation have reservation systems. So what I've asked Aspirit to do is look at what other states are doing and what that window is of cancellation, and then what do they give them as far as a refund, and can we decrease that window to where they still get a refund and then they let us know. And so and some of it needs to be on our team to call, and if we can get a hold of them, and we're going to work that, but we are still pulling some reports and we're going to make some changes on that for sure. And that's just in our business rules also that we can make changes on.
I've got one other question. Do you have sites, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but sites that are non-reservable?
We do have some walk-in sites.
Travelers, or some of those is just
we do have some walk-in sites. And what we're also looking at is same-day reservations. So when they come in, they can make a reservation right then. And that would alleviate, kind of like your hotel system. Of course, staffing's a problem, making sure we have enough people there to do that. In the prime season only, but there are some things we can do on that also. So thanks for bringing that up.
Anything else for Linda? Oh, yes.
So you had, I have two comments. One is you were comparing your rates to the Army Corps of Engineers that are $10 as well. Are your facilities comparable to that, or do you have better facilities?
Well, I would like to think we have better facilities, but that's in the eye of the beholder, right? And so the Corps of Engineers has received quite a bit of federal funding. So they put in a lot of new facilities. If you talk to the managers that share those areas, they're always going to tell you, we don't price this out, you know? So, but as a management tool to look at all this, we need to look at everything, but good question. I'm not sure I can answer that they're better or we're better. I think Kansas State Park's done a pretty incredible job.
My second question is, what do you know about those annual users, those annual permit users? It seems to me that if they're staying 60 days, you know, that's an average or more, you know, are they retired folk or are they people that can't find affordable housing?
That's exactly the latter. That's what we're starting to see. So we'll see nonprofits or churches and to buy annual camps for individuals to come out into our state park systems. I want to be careful what I say because there still are users, and but it needs to be affordable. And what that does is that takes up a site that's available for somebody else that camps for recreation. And so when we go back to our vision of what we are, you know, we are a recreation area and we're not a housing area. And so that will be one tool that we hope can help minimize some of those purchases. Good question.
Okay. Any more?
What do you base your fees on? Do you base it on the size of the vehicle that comes in there?
Well, the
Type
fee,
of motorhome, a fifth wheel camper. When you drive a semi, depending on the size, length, and weight, you pay more for the bigger vehicles. There's a source of revenue.
that's a good one. We don't do that today. This is a different permit system. So that's our vehicles, not our camping. The vehicles, when they come in, they have one set fee and you can go get that at your DMV when you renew your tag. I encourage you to do that.
Some of these people got $150,000 camper. They can afford more money to pay.
Yeah, I don't judge them that way. They're still campers and.
It's about revenue. That's what our government is.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Well, that's all the workshop. This is one last chance for any general public comment on non-agenda items. Is there anybody on Zoom?
Nope, it does not look like it.
You have something?
Yeah, hey, Fort Riley L.
Yes, you can go to the microphone, Jason.
Go ahead, please.
So it's a fun place to hunt. Fort Riley elk. My son drew a tag. I haven't yet after all these years. My question about Fort Riley elk tags is this last year, there is a hunter that mortally wounded one and then was able to keep pursuing another bull. You know, those are really hard tags to get, the bull tag at Fort Riley. I'm sure you guys are all aware. Is there any chance that we may ever get Derek or you guys to write up some stipulation that if you draw blood on Riley, that, you know, that tag's punched instead of wounding one and then wounding another one and then finally getting your bull? Is that was a real hot topic on social media. This guy saying, yeah, you know, I shot one, wounded him, you know, should have I punched my tag? Did I not? I think it had somewhere around 50,000 comments.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, Brad Lovelace. So the person knew that the animal was mortally wounded,
Yeah.
but, well, that's just unethical hunting.
Well,
So,
I agree. And I think, I don't want to speak for Derek, but I think he was pretty unglued that the guy kept going and, you know, if we could write a provision in there somewhere, I don't know if that's possible, that on Riley, on that special of a tag, if you do wound a bull, if you draw blood, like in Alaska, your hunt's done. You know,
Problem you're gonna have is that everybody who shoots, I didn't draw blood, is a clean miss. And, you know, it didn't stop the Facebook talk.
well, so here's what happened when we drew a tag, when my son drew a tag. You end up meeting everybody that has hunted there. They all call and they want to give you, hey, this is where I was seeing them. This is where I was, you know, so it's a pretty tight knit group. Pretty sure I would think that 90% of the hunters, if they draw blood, they're going to get a hold of, you know, somebody's going to know that, hey, this guy drew blood. I think it'd be pretty hard to keep that a secret, you know.
Well, you have a good point.
You know, but with that being such a limited tag, I don't know whether they could write a provision in that, hey, if you draw blood, that was your tag, you're done.
What was
And
your
it's a-
name, sir? I'm sorry, what was your name?
Matt Shook.
Okay,
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself again.
I
But
thought so, but I couldn't remember.
I do know that was a real contentious deal, and everybody that had hunted Riley before, drawn a tag. And luckily, I had a kid that went on and played for Mays to the state football game, and Riley was, it was closed down most of the year for us, so we didn't get a chance to hunt that much, but meeting everybody, Derek, and everybody that had been out there previously, it was a pretty big deal to stay in contact with everybody. And then when this happened this year, I know it caused quite a firestorm that the guy continued to, he's like, hey, I'm not gonna punch my tag until I put it on an animal. So just,
yeah, we can sure discuss that.
okay, just something to bring up.
All right, thank you. Is there any more public comment on non-agenda items? Well, do we have any meeting dates we need to talk about, Sheila?
Do we need August? We have everything up through June. Do we need to set August yet? Dan?
We probably don't need to. Yeah, we can probably
Okay.
wait till March.
Wait till March. Okay,
Let's wait and do that, get a little closer to time.
okay.
The next meeting is March at Topeka at Ramada Inn. Is there any old business? Well, so far, so good on the new meeting time. It did not inhibit any public discussion.
We have plenty.
So
Good.
meeting adjourned.
Nice. It was nice to have a healthy input there for the first time.
Another
Good.
one. Yeah, pretty good.
That's a tough